Boy, that's fancy.
Welcome to the Ham Radio Workbench podcast live stream, live and direct from the QSO Today Virtual Ham Expo. So nice to be back here at QSO Today. Hello, everybody. Thanks for joining us on the live stream. And for those of you who are watching it later on or listening to the audio through the podcast feed, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you might be. So on the show today, we have a full house. So in addition to the regulars, we have some special guests. So let me do a quick rundown of who's on the show today. So first off, we have Vince, VE6LK,
Hello.
Rod, VA3ON,
Good evening, friends across America and around the world.
Mark, N6MTS,
Yoo-hoo!
and Mike, VA3MW.
I have nothing so elaborate. Good evening, everybody.
Hi there, everybody. So there's the regulars and myself, George KJ6VU. But our first special guest, our returning special guest for the live stream, we're turning this into a standard operating procedure here, is Troy, K4JDA. Hello, Troy.
Howdy, y'all. Good to be here and good to see everybody.
So for those of you who may not remember, when we did Baycon earlier in the year, we had a prize. So whoever donated the most money to Baycon won the privilege of joining us on a show, and Troy was the winner. I don't know if that's a great accolade or not, but anyway, Troy was the winner, and so he was on the last live stream and back again. And Troy, I understand you've got some questions for the panel today that perhaps we didn't get to the last time.
I do, and looking forward to having the discussion.
Great to have you here. And some of our other favorite folks who we've had on the podcast before, we have Thomas, K4SWL. Hi, Thomas.
Hello, how are you doing?
Very good. And for those of you, I mean, like, who would know, but Thomas is a YouTuber, and he has some great websites, qrpr.com, SWLing Post, so you should really check those out. And as he says, he does unscripted, real live operating videos from the field. Thomas, you're one of those guys who can throw a noodle in the tree and somehow make contacts. So we're all very envious of your apparent CW skills. So very good.
I gotta take the 200. I have to take the 220 volt generator to do it for me.
I need the 220 watt amplifier
a
for
lower
me.
power than that. Yeah.
And we have Kirk, NT0Z, contributing editor to a lot of radio magazines and also the author of Stealth Ham Radio. Hi, Kirk. How are you?
Hey, pretty good. Nice to be back. It's been about 6 months, maybe 3 months too long, so nice to be back.
Well, when we're thinking about getting a few of our faves on the show, we thought, we got to get Kirk back on here. So I'm glad you could make it. Good to see you.
I barely made it, but I am very glad I made it.
Well, so are we. And we also have John, W7DBO, who has the Field Radio YouTube channel. And John was on fairly recently to talk about field operating for a field day. How you doing, John?
Hello. Hopefully my microphone volume's come up now.
So the last time you were on, you were perched on a lawn chair at a lake with what looked like a phony baloney background for the field radio operating episode. But you really were in the field that time.
Yes, that was really nice. Unfortunately, we couldn't stay, and I wish I could just stay out in the field all the time, but it just snowed here, so in our mountains, so it's time to turtle up in the winter.
Is it really cold there?
It snowed last night. We had a heat streak,
okay.
and then all of a sudden, up in our mountains, at least where I go, the higher elevations just got snow last night. So it's time for winter field day. Let's get ready.
Yeah, it's 85 degrees here in San Jose, California, so it's a bit of a chill. So yeah. I can relate to your problem there.
Yeah. Just as long as your power stays on during this event.
Yeah, well, that is the problem. Yeah, exactly. So the overall flow for the show today, first off, what we're going to do is a quick round of what's on your workbench. Now, we always envisioned what's on your workbench to be like 5 minutes a person with maybe 3 people, 15, 20 minutes tops total. And it turns out it's about an hour and a half for 2 of us. And so the challenge here with 9 of us is to somehow get through this in like not forever time. So we're going to try to get through this in a quick way. Vince is going to mute Mark, so we have a shot at it.
Mark's already muted.
Mark muted himself. That's what I call self-editing. That's awesome. So anyway, we're going to do a quick round of what's in your workbench. And then Troy, as I mentioned before, Troy's got a bunch of questions for all of us here. And we'll also take a whole bunch of questions. If we have anybody in the audience to ask questions, we'll take questions from the listeners as well. So let's see. Do we have a volunteer for who wants to do what's on your workbench to start with?
Mark.
Pick me.
Yeah. Oh, at my peril. So Mark, what's on your workbench?
I actually have something that I want to talk about. That's
I bet
not
you do.
all that. Yeah.
That never happens.
No. Quick update on SOAR, satellite optimized amateur radio, the first product of my company. We are. There was a problem with the last revision of hardware that was a showstopper. I think I figured out what that problem is. I have another rev of hardware out at the manufacturers. I'm hoping to get that back in the next week or so. Quick update on SOAR. Move on past that. This weekend at QSO Today Ham Expo, I will be presenting on the Open Headset Interconnect Standard. And you'll have to come to my talk to see what that is. Or if you ask me nicely, I'll probably give you a summary of it here. But the Open Headset Interconnect Standard is going to have lots of devices that will be able to convert from various headsets to this open standard and then from various radios into this open standard. And so I've been working on a lot of that. One of the things that is going to be needed for that is a very inexpensive microphone preamplifier to take a dynamic mic up to electret level. And so I've been designing and playing with values on my camera is really not focusing on that, on a very simple 5-component circuit. Come on, camera, you can focus. Anyway, you get the idea. Transistor, 3 resistors, and a capacitor, and you can get about 15 dB of gain, and I can probably even increase that to about 20, on a dynamic microphone to make it look like an electret, using nothing but the power that already comes in through the mic line to drive an electret. This will all make sense when you see my presentation, why this is important. But I've been playing with a lot of those adapters, and I haven't really been able to talk too much about it because we're supposed to give new content to the QSO Today Ham Expo. But I will be talking about this a lot more. So if you're curious, come to my talk Sunday morning.
So the summary is it has to do with interoperability of gear.
Yes. So the primary goal, I'm being told that the stream seems broken. If you're in the chat room and the stream is broken or not broken, please let us know. Yes, the quick summary of it is it's a proposed standard for all like headsets connecting into radios. There's like no standard for that middleware, right? Is it a 3.5 millimeter? Is it a RJ45? Is it a 8-pin round aviation? What is it? And there's all these different standards, both electrical and physical. And so I propose a system that will greatly simplify that whole problem space. And for certain use cases, like shared shacks, like a club shack or an EOC or a field day event, it'll greatly simplify being able to move from one station to another. And in my standpoint, from a hardware manufacturer, it makes it a heck of a lot easier for me to make devices that go between the user and the radio.
Very good. So, that's good. That's a good summary. So we'll look forward to seeing your presentation. Do you know what time it is?
Sunday morning. Let me look it up.
All right. We can let everybody know after we figure out when that's at. So
it looks like 9 a.m. Pacific time on Sunday morning.
Oh, very good. All right. So not too early.
No.
All right. Let's see. Let's rotate over to Vince.
That was
Vince.
quick.
What's on? I think yes, remarkable. A personal best if there ever was one.
Mark, I did not finish the glass that I had poured, and you're done.
In anticipation of me getting started.
In anticipation, I poured a fresh one. And so I have been learning about RF in the shack. So a friend of mine quipped, he says, well, I see you're giving a presentation this weekend, and I'm presenting at another conference. And he says, I thought that would be RF in the shack, the unseen but not unheard enemy. And so I've integrated a new mixer into my shack, and for me this was a direct swap out of a mixer. Things like this microphone mapped into my computer, and I have a microphone on a boom at the other end of my desk that maps directly to the radio. And so it used to work. I put a new mixer in, and lo and behold, it's RF Feedback City. And when I took a look at the old mixer and the old mixer had an external AC to DC adapter where no doubt the ground was isolated on both sides, and the new one has an integrated power cord. So I tried various things. I tried building a cheater power cord without a ground wire. Shh, don't tell anybody. And that didn't work. I took the same power cord and I wrapped it about 15 times through an FT240, through a 240-43, like the big round one. That didn't do anything. I tried putting ferrites on the audio lines. That did nothing. I isolated all the audio lines out except the one going to the radio. That did nothing. So I spoke with a friend of mine who's a broadcasting engineer and a ham, and he says, oh, well, try a direct input box. So a DI box is what guitar players know. They plug the output of the guitar into the DI box, and it converts it to a line level or an XLR connector, which then spins off to the board. So what a DI box does, well, actually, Mark explained it to me very clearly. He said, it's a balun.
Yeah, pretty much.
It's a balun.
The important part is it's an audio isolation transformer, so there's no common ground between the two sides.
Right. And so the ground in it, there's a switch on a DI box to lift the ground. And so in my case, I've lifted the ground out of the circuit. But in an XLR connector, if you're not familiar, they call it balanced audio because there's a ground wire, so we'll keep him out of the picture. And there's a hot and a cold. And so the balanced hot to ground is 180 degrees out of phase with respect to the cold hot to ground, or the cold to ground. And this is how it becomes such a low noise microphone cable, which is why XLR is so popular in pro audio applications. Of course, us radio guys, we use high impedance stuff. It's just two wires. It's hot and ground, prone to pick up noise. So the DI box's job is then to transform that 600 ohm impedance to the 50K impedance of a line level, a microphone level, going into the front of the radio. So a DI box does attenuation and padding. Anyway, so thank you for coming to my TED Talk about Vince learned about DI boxes this week. And then it fixed the problem. I mean, long story short, as soon as I ground lifted it, it fixed the problem. Then I just had to fix the levels so that there was no overdriving going on coming into the front end of the radio.
So did you have to? Was the real trick the ground isolation? It sounds like or did you really need the impedance transformation too?
Yeah, I needed the impedance transformation as well, if only to make the audio sound nice. I mean, we can live with overdriven audio going into the front. We shouldn't, but we can from a technical perspective. But the ground lift was really the key. I had tried to manufacture cables to do this without thinking about the audio impedance transformation. It's been a heck of a learning for me this week. And that didn't work for me. I tried the old trick of let's apply a 0.1 microfarad computer capacitor across the hot to hot, the ground to hot, and the other hot to ground in a triangle configuration inside the XLR connector, and another one at the other end of the 1/4 inch cable, just hot to ground. That did nothing. So it was really the ground that had to be isolated.
Yeah, and it's not just the ground; it's the audio as well.
Yeah,
it's the audio transformer. Yeah, the comment that was just put up on screen is about the ground loop isolators, $10 at Amazon. Yeah, really, what you needed was that the isolation, the DC isolation. The ground lift on the audio or on the power side isn't going to do anything because the neutral is probably all the way through. The reason your wall wart worked is because it has a big hunk of iron that is a transformer.
Right.
And that transformer is isolating the neutral on the source side from the negative on the load side.
Right.
Really quickly, I want to take one brief moment to point out that viewers will be able to enter questions into the chat in the Q&A box. We see all of those, but they won't be able to see other people's questions. So I've seen a couple of questions come up in the Q&A about, like, why can't I see anything? Is anybody there? What's going on? you're only ever going to see your own questions, but we see all of them. So we are seeing them, but you're not going to see anybody else's questions unless we put them up on the screen. And so it'll look awfully quiet, but it's not. I promise you, we are seeing and reading every single one of them. So,
yeah. So, hey, related to all of this, the other thing I do is I take the output of the mixer and I run it through a Shure. Oh, sure. I had it on my tongue, the tip of my tongue a minute ago. A Shure X2S. So it's an XLR to USB isolating transformer. And I feed that into my computer. Now, to make sure that I'm totally isolated, I have one of these USB isolators, which you can find on Amazon for $70, or you can order from AliExpress for a tenth of that. And these are ADUM 9130 based. So I've had one of these in the shack forever. And that eliminated one of my ground loops and the RF feedback that went with it. So anyway, it's been a heck of a week as I have learned to work with my new mixer,
which has all kinds of interesting effects.
And so thank you very much. It's been a really interesting week. So there we go. Back to you, George.
All right, very good, Vince. So just a quick question on your mixer. Are you using the mixer for one microphone to multiple transmitters, or like what are you actually using the mixer for? Or multiple audio production work like this?
Multiple transmitters. No, you must think I'm a guy who's got lots of transmitters. I have one on my table, one HF transmitter. No, I use this microphone for podcasting and such. And I have another El Cheapo microphone that was $7.95 at Princess Auto, which is the Canadian equivalent of Harbor Freight Tools. And that's the one that and it sounds awful on podcasting, but it's got the right passband for radio. So it's I'm using it to sweeten the microphones and give them a little bit of color, but not much for HF.
So that's the amazing thing. You can buy a $7 microphone that's a terrible microphone, unless you're using it for communications, in which case that lousy frequency response is perfect for this application.
Yep.
Have you heard the Heil elements that are meant for contesting? God,
yes.
They sound terrible.
Yeah, they do.
Yes.
Yeah, they're awesome.
But punchy.
But they're perfect for contesting.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly correct. So,
all right, very good. So next up, Thomas, I'm going to pick on you and find out what's on your workbench.
Well, so like the big thing I've been working on lately actually is the Murphy bench, which is my idea of having a workbench that can fold out from the wall like a Murphy bed, and getting my measurements together, trying to sort out what all can go on that, and just trying to put together all the ideas. And yeah, so it's really interesting doing it because it really makes you distill your workbench down to just the most essential things, because there's not a lot of room in it. And we'll probably talk about more of that later, but but it's an interesting kind of exercise. It's sort of like packing for a vacation, and you can only take one radio, which, by the way, I'd never do.
Well, last time we had this conversation, your rule about taking one radio turned into 4. So
it did. I was a big old hypocrite. Big old hypocrite. Once I discovered the spot underneath the trunk, I could lift the floor of the trunk up, and where their spare tire is and stuff. I found out that an MTR3B fits in there, a KX1 fits in there. Worked out great. Actually, my big bench thing today was all outdoors. While we were in Canada, a locust tree in the front yard kind of split off, and one whole piece of it came down, which made us realize that locust tree was dead. It was really tall, but not a very wide tree. It didn't have a very wide trunk or anything. But it was just, if I would have sawed that thing without any regard for anything, it would have fallen and hit our fire pit, and it would have taken down my antenna at the same time. It would have been like a twofer. And so today a buddy came over. He was going to socialize. I put him to work. So I sawed down the tree. It worked really well. I brought my antenna down, and I realized I just need to replace this stupid antenna because it's been up too long. But then I decided I'll need some more time to put together all the pieces for that, and I need to lift it back up in the tree, because when the tree came down, when the tree that we cut down came down, it actually pulled the line out that I was going to use to hoist the thing back up in the tree. So there I am. I have gotten more arborist throw line time in today than I've ever gotten, because normally I'm throwing a line up in a tree in the field for, soda or poda or something, and it's 45 feet up, maybe max, I needed to go up like double that today. And so it was a challenge to get that much kind of energy behind that throw line, to get that thing up in the tree. I eventually did, but I'll be pulling it right back down in 2 weeks. And I'm already thinking through, how can I turn this horizontal delta loop into I need 5 or 6 sides on it, I think. Because I think it helps out delta loops, doesn't it? It helps out loops the more sides you have, right? When it's horizontal.
I that's a good question. I'm not a loop expert, but I remember reading somewhere where the difference between a perfect loop and a triangle is not that much.
Yeah.
But I suspect Kirk probably knows more about it than I do. Kirk, any
You're
words of
good.
wisdom on the loop?
Yeah.
Yep. The triangle is the minimum effective dose for loopiness, and
Right.
the difference between a triangle and a square or a circle is not detectable by anybody in a practical sense.
Yeah.
But if you make an elongated rectangle, no more loopy.
Interesting. Okay.
So
Well,
the number of sides isn't nearly as important as the symmetry.
yeah.
Is that what you're saying, Kirk?
You want to enclose the maximum area, but if you're making a triangle, make
maximum
it an
area.
equilateral triangle. Otherwise, you're gonna, start getting away from the loopiness, and you want the loopiness.
Okay.
Yeah, I may just put back up the same kind of delta loop. I have to mitigate my house, some other trees and things. It's a lot of fun, and it's actually a lot of head scratching when you put that thing up. You need 7 people. It's like erecting a circus tent or something. You just need a lot of people for it. But but that's what I was up to today, and that's what's on my bench. I did do one thing last week that was kind of fun, really really simple project, but hopefully can help out some other people. I figured out a really easy way to assemble a narrow CW filter for the Yaesu FT817818, because those are rare as hen's teeth. I mean, you can't find those anymore. They're no longer made, the Yaesu version of it. And so, yeah, I found a board. A fellow ham in Poland makes the board and can adapt it for Collins filters that you can purchase on eBay. And so the sum total of everything, and the soldering it together is so easy. There's only 3 points on it to solder, and I think the sum total for it was maybe $130, which is not bad for used ones right now are $200 or more. So I'm happy to have a second Yaesu FT817ND with a narrow CW filter in it.
So, Thomas, follow-up question, because this is important. Longtime listeners will remember from your interview that the Murphy bench was supposed to have a specific feature in it, which meant when you put the Murphy bench up, what was it supposed to do, and does it do it?
So I haven't built it yet. I'm still in the planning stages, but when you put that bench up, all of the little pieces of legs and solder and everything should just go straight down into a trash bin right beneath it. That's the
all
idea.
the test equipment.
Along with the test equipment and the things I forgot about, like my glasses and stuff. But it'll be in the trash bin.
that lost screw that you never put back in.
Oh, you know what? Look at all the little chips you're going to be able to find that you knew that flew away somewhere. You just have to.
Oh, and I see Grant is asking, did I get Starlink? I did not get Starlink. We have too many trees at our house. We live in a very remote area, and we have no RFI whatsoever, and we also have no internet whatsoever. Right now, I'm using a hotspot. It seems to be working pretty well. I would love to get Starlink, but we have ridge lines around us, and we have really tall trees. And I think until they put more of those in the sky, I probably won't have very reliable service with Starlink. But I really want it. I really want it. I would love to have high-speed internet. So.
Yep. It's more important than running water these days. So I don't know.
It really is.
It is really. I do have one quick question for you. I'm looking at you on video. For those of you listening on the audio, we're doing this on a live video stream, and I see a box on your bench, and I have no idea what that box is. And so I have to ask you, what is that little box with the handle and what looks like a speaker on the side?
Okay, well, I guess I can say this here. No one else is watching, right?
No, only 4,000 of our closest friends. They won't tell a soul.
This is a radio I'm testing right now that should be out before too long. It's going to look kind of grainy here on my video, but this is the Pentec TR45L, which is a little QRP transceiver, does CW only. It has gorgeous audio, analog. It's very Apollo-esque. You can't see the controls really well with my video, but has these little standoff handles. It just sounds wonderful. It's a great radio. We're still in the process. I'm beta testing the firmware and taking it out. And so I'm not going to comment a lot about what it can do yet because it's still in process. But John WA3RNC makes these. He is a master at putting together just really effective radios. It's so nice. It's funny because I've also got the Xiegu or Xiegu G106, and it was sent to me by Mike K. MRD, who was not a fan of radio at all.
That's putting it mildly.
Putting it mildly. And got it in, and frankly, I really, I haven't transmitted with it yet, other than into a dummy load, because the transmit's a little on the dirty side. And so I really want to wait till they have a firmware version that fixes that. I don't want to go out in the field and use it with a dirty transmit. But the audio is kind of Xiegu audio, which is like mediocre. I really wish they'd work on the audio on their stuff. And then you listen to this radio, and I am telling you, it sounds amazing. It sounds so warm and very analog-esque, and it's a great radio.
George, have you ordered one yet?
I need a backup.
They look very retro. I've kept vintage. I like it,
especially the
meter.
It.
Yeah, with the meter.
I love the meter. Yeah,
it has
so is
a
that
lot.
Kit or is it assembled?
Yes. Okay. So they have a kit version. I'm sure he'll have a kit version and an assembled version. So it has a lot. He really put a lot in this radio, yet at the same time, there's a control for everything. There's a switch for everything. There are like no deep menus, no nothing like that. You just get on there and it just runs like mad. It's so great. And and something about, I have to say, there's a speaker on this side of it here, and it really makes the speaker sound amazing. Using this much of the enclosure as like I guess an acoustic chamber. Wow.
I think we get used to teeny little radios because they have tiny speakers and they're not resonant cabinets. And when you hook up a real speaker, like the first time I ever listened to a digital UHF repeater, I thought, man, that sounds terrible. Then I plugged a real speaker into the radio. It's like, actually, it didn't sound too bad. But so the speaker really makes a big difference.
Oh yeah. And this one has a very nice, field radios tend to have really lousy speakers. One of my favorite field radios is the KX3. It has a lousy speaker. It's kind of like an afterthought, I struggle to listen to it in the field and usually just use headphones, in fact, with it. But this one actually has a really, really nice one. So, but yeah.
Well, look forward to getting the review of that.
I went to the website and it blew me away. The picture, I put the link up there for everybody to see. Just search on WA3RNC and you'll find it right away. It's gorgeous.
It is.
Oh, we should get him on here and talk about his radios. That sounds very cool. All right. Well, very good. And next up, Kirk, I was going to come to you next and find out if you've had time lately to have anything on the bench.
Well, I have a lot of stuff on the bench, too much stuff on the bench. It's getting stuff off the bench. That's the problem these days. Before I get started, there's a comment in the chat. David is wondering about the rectangle loop comment, so I'll just briefly. If you're making a horizontal loop, this doesn't necessarily apply to a vertical loop, but if you're making a horizontal loop, you want to make it square or an equilateral triangle. You don't want to make it an elongated loop or it doesn't work like a horizontal loop anymore. So that's pretty much in a nutshell the nature of the entire comment. On the bench, so this entire summer has kind of been dedicated to painting my house. Now, I'm doing it all by myself, and so it's remotely related to ham radio because the house holds up my tiny tower. and on top of my tiny tower is a little hexagonal beam. So painting the house, it takes hours and days when you're doing it by yourself. So I haven't actually done a lot of ham radio over the summer, unfortunately. I am working on refoaming a couple of baby Advent speakers that somebody gave me. And I'd known for quite some time that refoaming is possible, but I had figured it was an arcane art, and I never had the gumption to try it. And as it turns out, if you watch about 10 YouTube videos, it's not too hard. So hopefully we'll get those baby Advents sounding as nice as they did a couple of decades ago.
Do these come in a calendar, like at a certain time of year or something? Is that why they're called Advent? I've never heard this term.
I have no idea. Advent speakers, I'm sure you've heard of the company from back in the day.
I had a pair of Advents in like 1978.
Yeah, exactly.
Way back.
Yeah. And these are the small ones. They're kind of like a big bookshelf speaker, the baby Advents. Yeah.
Okay.
And they sound great, but they don't sound great if the foams have deteriorated and then they buzz and rattle. And so anyway, you can refoam them. And the fun part is to get the voice coil aligned properly. You play a 700 hertz audio tone at a low volume through the speaker while you're positioning the foam surrounds before you glue them in place so that they don't rattle when you finally lock them down. That's apparently is the secret. The other thing I've been working on is recapping a Heathkit vacuum tube voltmeter that a nice old timer gave to me. I'd like to do some work on some tube gear. I built some tube gear back in the day in my misspent youth, and I prefer using VTVMs on tube circuits. And so I got rid of a VTVM so long ago, I can't remember exactly where it went. So I had to get another one. And I don't even know if I need to recap this one, but I did it anyway because the DC blocking capacitor in there is rated for 1.6 kilovolts. And so I figured, might as well recap it since I'll be using it. So the other thing I've been working on this summer is learning how to weld, and it's been kind of a comedy of errors. So welding initially is earmarked for the anti-scalp wheel on my riding mower, which broke off, but eventually welding will find its way into ham radio construction. And so I've been learning to use a wire feed welder, and so far there's been a lot of blown fuses and a lot of frustration, but I am making progress.
So when I learned to weld, my favorite tool was the grinder.
Yes, exactly.
Favorite tool of crappy welders everywhere.
Is that
welders,
the weld
then there's
eraser?
grinders.
Yes, it's basically a weld eraser. Yes.
When I first learned to weld, and I use that term very loosely, was in middle school with an arc welder, and it completely did not work out. And so now I have a sexy auto darkening welding helmet, and they're practically free compared to what they used to cost 10, 20 years ago. And the thing works great. It automatically switches. You can adjust its opacity. It works great. The problem is my semi-curmudgeonly eyeballs still want about 20 dB more base illumination on the workpiece so I can see it. And the problem is I can either have the 500 watt halogen lamp on or the welder on high, but if I do both, the breaker pops. And so I have to run the welder on a generator and the light on the wall socket. And there's been so much painting I haven't circled back, but I will. I will get it sooner or later.
Well, that sounds like a load of fun. I have no idea. I've never welded in my life, but I've watched videos of people doing it. I wish I could, because every once in a while there's some thing you wish you could actually make. So it seems like a
Well,
great skill to have.
Yeah, my uncle was a master welding fabricator. And so it's kind of like, he's not teaching me, unfortunately. He's not with us anymore. But having him show you how to weld is kind of like learning how to fly from Chuck Yeager. You just. You just can't make the leap.
What a great description.
Yeah.
Now,
The
Kurt,
bar is high.
I'm really curious if you welded any nice stealth antennas lately.
No, I have not welded any stealth antennas, but I'd really love to get my AC power lines come in overhead, and we have some humongous tax credits and whatnot coming next year for energy improvements here in the States, and I'm really trying to wrangle a way to get my overhead power drop underground and not go broke doing it, and so there might be a way. So if I can get my overhead power drops out of the way, there can be a lot more non-stealthy stealth antennas at the QTH here.
Mm.
Very good. Well, it sounds like you have plenty of projects you can queue up there.
Too many.
Yeah, as usual. All right, very good. Thanks, Kirk. Hey, Mike, let's rotate over to you. What do you got on the bench?
I spent last weekend, since you guys all bailed and left Rod and I in charge last week.
Big mistake. Really
big mistake.
Big mistake.
We learned about grounds, and it was cold for the first time up here since April, and that got me thinking about 160 meters and receiving antennas. So I put in an RBOG at one part of the remote, and it's a KD9SV, Kilo Delta 9 SV kit. And I tell you, I'm pretty happy with it. It's a night and day difference.
No, hang on a second.
To go with that,
you just said you put it in RBOG. I have no idea what that is.
Okay, well, beverage over ground, reversible.
Thank you. Okay. Oh.
Okay, and it's running about 6 inches above the ground. And and you can go down, well, there's
6 inches or 6 feet?
Mine's about 6 inches.
Okay.
And you're not talking about a can of Coors as the beverage.
That would be no.
Okay,
beverage,
just checking.
Yeah.
Okay.
What direction is your beverage pointing?
Right now, northeast, southwest, which is the typical thing we do here in eastern part of, as Vince says, Kanakistan.
Are you just using it for receive only, or?
Yeah, it wouldn't take transmitting too well.
No, beverages are not transmit antennas.
I didn't think so.
Yeah,
I was just curious.
And so that's what a bog is, or so you start with a beverage, and typically they're wavelengths long. But when you get into the bog world, they can get smaller. So this, by all intents and purposes, is easy to manage because it's only 200 feet long. And lots of dialogue and discussion on it. And I was looking at a different one online, but one of the club members had one for sale at a great price. So pretty happy with it. So that handles my Europe. The way it's angled right now, Northern Europe to almost South Africa, they're very broad. But one of the purposes of a beverage isn't really gain, but to reduce noise in opposite directions. And the first night I had it on and was playing with it, listening it in the wrong direction was the right way to go, because what I was doing was nulling out the thunderstorms behind me. And there's about a 15 to 20 dB knockdown there, and that's significant if you can reduce that noise. And so pretty happy with that. I might run a non-reversible one going sort of north-south or a little west of south for the U.S. and South America. But I've fortunately got the property to do it, as long as we have our cottages and stuff available. I'll take advantage of that until we get too old and the wheelchair doesn't make it through the marsh type of thing. So that was part of last weekend. And then, of course, we had a big windstorm back in the spring, took down the 160-meter inverted L. I'm going to show a picture of the trees that go with this, but I'll give you the visual part first. When I and I'm a big fan of dipoles and the way they work. But when I hoist stuff up in big trees, I use generally UV protected Dacron you can get from DX Engineering. And then I believe from them, although I can't remember, purchased UV protected shock cord, 1/4-inch shock cord. trees have a habit of moving when it gets windy. So I use the Dacron to go over the tree and down and tie it off, and I usually go 8 to 10 feet of 1/4-inch shock cord, depending on whether we're holding up the middle of a dipole, which can get heavy or not. And that hopefully gives us a lot of flexibility, no pun intended, in a big blow that it doesn't snap, because the tree is going to win. So I'm going to do a share of a window here, Mr. Producer. And can you? Well, anyway, well, this will work. So this tree here, while not looking very big, is about 85. Oh, let me do it up here. It's about 85 feet to here.
I see about 20 trees there. Can you? Okay, which one did you say? That
this one
Okay,
on the left.
Oh yeah.
About 85 feet to there. And then I make it an inverted L, and I go over to the right and to the top of, actually not that tree, there's another one just behind it. So that gives me a beautiful inverted L with elevated radials, and I'll come back to the elevated radials. So, I've got to launch a line over this tree and a line over the other tree. I usually use the drone. I did a whole talk on drones for the QSO Today Expo 2 years ago, I guess now. Go to get the drone, and the $50 dropper kit that comes with it was failing, so I had to resort to the air cannon, compressed air, and firing a weight of about the equivalent of 2 AA batteries.
Had to or got to?
Got to. It was a got
to.
Absolutely got to. And dead calm, because this line is incredibly light, right? Otherwise, it doesn't lay down where you want it. So imagine, and then go find the other end in the woods, which is all, wrapped in orange duct tape. So hopefully you can see it. Actually works incredibly well. There was a trick hoisting this because I was by myself. So you hoist up one side and the other, and it was great until, back up here, this branch, I think, was in the way. So the whole thing's up and it's being held down. So I had to launch another line over the middle of the horizontal part. And I know it's going to drop in the woods, and I got to go find it and, pull it back so I have a double line to tug on. And I use the blue polyprop stuff that you tie things down with, like binder twine, but it's polyprop. You can buy 1,000 feet for $2. It's indestructible. It's incredibly strong. So I launched. Now you have to visualize this. Now only ham operators will get this story. So I launched this projectile with the 15-pound Kevlar fishing line trailing out behind, and it's clearing over the top, and it's going to probably land in another area code. And I just had this urge at the moment that I tossed I grabbed the outgoing line just to stop it for a second, which of course reversed the direction of the projectile, and it came back underneath and landed at my feet over top of the tennis court fence. I can't repeat this shot ever again in my lifetime.
We need a sound effect for that.
Was it this one?
That's a sound effect.
Anyway, so then I was able to, manhandle the horizontal part around the branch, and because of the shock cord, I tightened it up, so I'm able to pull on it a lot. The branch sprung. I let go of my tug line. It went up above, and Bob's your uncle. So it all worked out wonderfully, and now we're just testing that antenna, and pretty happy with it. So, but I can't. I'd forgotten the advantage of using, because if you can't hear them, you can't work them, of course. And
so, Mike,
I
got a couple of questions for you. What bands are you using the Beverage for?
This one right now is only 160.
Oh, okay.
But you can do them for multiple bands. There's cutting charts.
What beverages don't need to be resonant? Why only 160?
This one has a preamp on it to bring it to normal. Usually they're pretty weak, about 20 dB down.
Yeah.
So it has a preamp on it, and it also has a bandpass filter in it. Oh. Quite often done on beverages to ensure you don't get any broadcast interference.
Oh, especially at 160. Yeah.
Especially at 160.
And Paul asked,
and Dino's in his comments absolutely right too. There are people, and apparently they work with snow on top of them. So
actually, so I was going to ask Paul's question is what happens in the snow, and Dino's follow up, put it on the ground. Do you want to comment on that?
Yeah. So on the snow, lots of reports with no issue, and There are people have laid them into the ground on top of the grass, let the grass go over. The purists say, just run it about an inch above the ground if you can. The nice thing is the deer, elk, moose, elephants, giraffes don't hit them. Because there are a fair number of write-ups from people in South Africa as well.
Thank God. I thought you were going to say
beverage.
there's a fair number of people in northern Ontario who have giraffes and elephants. Sorry.
Well, the last thing you want is a moose tangled up in your antenna. So
That's right.
Hey, Mike,
so-
it's Kirk NT0Z. I should bug you outside the session. I forgot. I have a 400-foot barbed wire fence line between me and my nearest neighbor, and he's going to let me put a 2-wire bidirectional beverage on there before winter. And so you might know of a good design. I want to keep mine cheap and dirty. Ground, as I understand it, one wire gets grounded on one end, the other wire on the other, and you can kind of choose your directional pattern. But mine is going to be about 5 feet above the ground, and I've heard of RBOGs, but I guess I've never seen any, performance comparison. But it's probably minimal.
Great idea. There are DX Engineering one calls it Flex Bev. I was actually going to buy that one. And then I remembered my great friends that run remoteqth.com, because I used a lot of their stuff in my early remote days. And he's got a whole bunch of things for beverage type antennas. Sometimes you use RG59 for the feed line. And RG59 is super inexpensive. You can buy 1,000 feet for $100 and go from there. So
especially if you've got a preamp at the feed point.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, I've got about 4,000 feet of RG6 in the shop.
That'll do.
There you go.
That'll work.
Actually, that's what I meant, Kirk, was RG6.
Yeah.
So
yeah.
Actually, I've switched all.
The reversible beverages are not quite as simple as only grounding one side of each wire.
Darn it.
No, it's a transformer at the remote end that takes the common mode going toward the remote end, turns it into differential mode and sends it back. And then at the feed point, what you end up doing is you either select the common mode currents coming in, which would be that as the front of the antenna, or the differential mode currents coming in, which is that as the back of the antenna.
Right.
It's a weird thing where you're taking advantage of common mode versus differential mode, but you get only one feed line at one end of the antenna, and you've got to have a box at the other end. Both need to be grounded both the boxes need a ground point to be able to terminate the opposite. But yeah, it's with some transformer magic at the opposite end, you can make it work pretty well.
I figured I would initially run the wires and then handle the grounds. And then as we get closer to winter, I can do whatever transforming and boxes need to take place.
Yeah, you can start out with just a resistor on one end, and it'll be a directional bog or a beverage. And then you can upgrade it later by replacing your terminating resistor at the far end with the transformer magic.
Oh, great.
So is there a magic in having that 6 inches above the okay, there's not. I didn't know if that was because of your particular design. That's because I'm planning to put a bog in sometime this winter, at least one, to experiment with it. And I have to do it as a proper on the ground sort of thing because we have so many bears everywhere here, and they through anything that's bear height. So some people will take and actually with their beverages, if they're elevated, they use wire nuts every so often to hold the thing together. So when a bear goes through, there's a weak point and then you can connect it back up. But I would rather just have it on the ground.
If I lived in an urban area, where you have all those neighbors with all your fences and everything, I'd just run one right down the fence line, or so a rod like at your place.
When you describe this, Mike, I think, running a wire down a fence, I tend to think of that as a definition of a lousy antenna, and you'd only do it in a pinch. But let me pull you back on the beverage. Well, that's my what I'm getting to here. So for people that are listening to this who have no idea what a beverage antenna is, they're getting the notion that it's low to the ground and very long. But what's the advantage of a beverage antenna? Because the conventional wisdom is up and high in the air. Why do you want an antenna super low to the ground?
Yeah, absolutely. You want that there to, well, that's the design, right? Was it Mr. Beverage?
Mm-hmm. It was Mr. Beverage.
It was
I
Mr.
think
Beverage.
Dr.
Yes.
Beverage, maybe.
Yeah, Dr.
I think
Beverage.
you're right. And there's just so many designs, all of them the same thing. And Mark brought up common mode currents. And of course, now you've got these common mode currents, which we've all talked about as being ugly things. Well, we want them until we get to the feed line, and then you want to chop. Then you got to choke it.
But so what's the net point of having a beverage antenna? What do I get out of it? Why would I want one?
Huge improvements in signal to noise ratio.
On the low bands.
On the low bands. Don't look at your S meter. Well, and this can be up to 40 meters too, or 30 meters, depending.
Yeah.
You know, if you're sitting in an S9 noise floor the whole time and you put some equivalent down, and all of a sudden your noise floor goes down, but you're copying guys with maybe S5, S6, who cares? I can hear what they're saying. I didn't even know they were there before.
The first time I ever saw it, I knew of anybody who used a beverage antenna, even though the idea has been around since Dr. Beverage came up with it in 1928 or whatever. Some friends of mine did the Duce Island de-expedition back in 06 or 07, and they had 4 beverages in their receiving system. And I assume it's not like they had to get away from noise because they're in the middle of nowhere. So in that case, why do you suppose they needed that kind of receiving antenna?
Because it's a lot easier to build a 2 wavelength antenna at 160 meters on the ground than it is to put a half wavelength 160 meter antenna in the air.
So you have to have a transmitting antenna to go with it.
You do still need to have a transmitting antenna, but you can solve that problem with an amplifier, right?
Good.
You can make an inefficient antenna, stick it up in the air, and amplify it. That doesn't work on receive. And so the Beverage gets you the receive quality and signal to noise ratio, and you can stick a preamplifier at the antenna, and it ends up compensating for it. We have plenty of RF gain on the receive side. It's the noise floor that's a problem, right? And so, yeah.
So if you just went from, let's say, a half-wave dipole and switched to the Beverage, the actual signal level, from what I understand what you guys are saying, the signal level would go down, but the noise would go down a lot more. And so that difference is you can then amplify that and pull the signal out of the less noise. Is that the gist of it?
Is that true for a full half wavelength? I think the assumption is that. Okay, so the Beverage still has a better signal to noise ratio even over a full proper resonant half wave antenna.
Yep.
Because you never find anyone that has a full proper resonant half wave antenna at 160, right? That's the problem, is that it's very difficult to build that antenna in the air at 160 meters.
Okay. Let's keep in mind that on the low bands we have too much signal. So you should never have a preamp on below, whatever you need. But Tim W4TME in our group this weekend will be talking about when to use preamps and when to use attenuators. But essentially, below 40 meters, you should never have especially after dark, never have a preamp on. And on 160, full attenuation, and you still have loads of signal.
Yeah.
Okay.
That's incredibly important.
So to kind of wrap up on the Beverage thing, we have a question here from Bill. He says, I assume the Beverage antenna, I will need a transmit receive relay to use it on my 7300.
Yes, and you can make your own TR relay. DX Engineering has a device called an RTR1. I think there's a 2 now that beautifully integrate with your radio today, and then you can sort of reach up with a toggle switch and just quickly check, or flip it the other way and have it in full time. So, or you can build your own TR relay. It would have to use the push to talk line out of the radio. But
does the 7300 not have a RX only antenna input? It doesn't. Okay.
No. But what a great addition to a 7300. I think you'll be impressed.
Yeah.
Okay, very good. Thanks, Mike. So, John, let's rotate this on over to you. What's on the W7 DBO bench?
Well, I invented a computer. No.
Tell us about it.
I got bored with everything else, and so
was it older than mine?
No, it's actually a brand new computer. So I've tried and I don't have the mental time to really get into Raspberry Pi to the point where I trust it in the field. It's fun playing around, but when I go in the field, I'm so much used to Windows that if something goes wrong in Windows, I'm failure, confident that I can fix a driver, fix some software. I've taken Raspberry Pis in the field, and something goes wrong, and I have to type in some code, and it's just not there. So I went down the road of really wanting a microcomputer, but one powerful enough, especially with the digital modes, to decode a lot. So you get into low power computers, and they just don't decode as fast. And I kind of figured this out on the 13 Colonies event when everybody was cramming, trying to get to the special event stations. You just seemed like I was slow and late to the game every time I tried replying to them. And so then I brought out my faster, more powerful computer, and then I started making contacts. So that was kind of an interesting experiment. If there's a lot of things that decode, a slower computer, it may be just a second or two, but that's all it takes, because a lot of the operators on the other side are using that little checkbox that says, first station to decode, go ahead and reply to them. And so you have to be the first in their computer. And if you're late decoding their signal, then anyway, so that's the long story. So what I did is I invented this. I'll show it on the camera for those that are on camera. I invented a computer. And
wow, it looks just like a Pelican case.
It looks like just like a Pelican case. I've had this case for years. But what I wanted was something small enough and light enough, and it's still in prototype, so my screen still is kind of flopping around there. But I pretty much just put a little screen on there, and then it's just one of those little square computers. If I can get it in
like
there.
like a NUC.
It's like a NUC, only a really cheap one. But it's a solid state drive. And then this yellow box is actually basically it's meant for if you go into a hotel room and you're trying to get Wi-Fi to everybody. It actually acts as a little Wi-Fi router.
It's a travel router.
It's a little travel router. So then I had to put a little power supply, because apparently this computer, in reading their things, said they really want like a solid 12 volt. They don't like drifting. So I put a little buck converter in there to bring my battery down. And then I spent a ton of Amazon money trying to find little connectors that do things like this, like having I can pull this off. Let's see. I had to go to a ribbon cable on my HDMI, because the space there on that lid is just not enough for a traditional HDMI cable. And so
describe what this looks like. So that's what, about a 13-inch screen or 10? What size screen
it's
is
an
that?
8-inch screen.
Yeah,
so
it's
it's
really
like
tiny.
an 8-inch Pelican that just has a little 8-inch monitor that's in the lid. Sorry, I guess I should say that for the podcast people, but it's a little nook that everything is just crammed inside a very, very small Pelican case. It's an 1150 Pelican case. And really what it gives me, the only reason why I have that monitor is because I've been getting into the ability to remote on my tablet. So I just really need that monitor there just to get the computer booted up and logged in and launch the remote software. And then I can run Windows off my tablet. And so I just kind of got this as ability to, and I like this little NUC that I got, because it actually has 3 video outputs built in. So I'm running one off a USB-C to a larger monitor that actually sends power to the monitor too. So I have a single cable going to a much larger monitor. Then I have the HDMI going to, the small monitor, and I still have a monitor spare. So I could, in the field for field day, I could run a 2, maybe 3 monitor setup quite easily without having to have extra video cards. And it's all just very low power. It has that Wi-Fi box. And so trying to get everything to fit, that's the hardest thing with anytime you do anything with boxes. Everything fits great until you try and plug anything in. And then all of a sudden nothing fits, because the right angle USB is just too big, or the plastic. That's why I had to go to a ribbon cable just for the HDMI, and I was able to figure out a combination of left angle, right angle turns to get the USB out. And so anyway, that's kind of what I've been working on. Is I want to just have this. This doesn't have power. It's too small for that. It's not tied to a radio, but I just want this like little portable field computer that I could run off a tablet, or I could run off a bigger computer for field day, or it parks on the air. I can pair this up with a wireless keyboard and mouse, and take it out, and just kind of the catch-all computer, that's not Raspberry Pi. So
Do you remember off the top of your head what the brand of that little computer is?
that is, I can look it up. It's of course an Amazon special, because Amazon.
Yeah, and of course we need to buy one right now. Yeah.
Oh,
Go ahead.
sold out.
Thank you for that, George. Thank you.
It's
George.
the Workbench bump. They're all gone.
Yes.
And we don't even know what it's called yet.
Yeah, it's I was able to upgrade it to 500 gig. I actually had a spot to put in another hard drive in it, but yeah, it's just I'll bring it up here, and
I saw one that was like a
share it.
little cube that's like what you're describing. And the brand was something like Chewy. I don't remember how to spell it. ChuiEi CH. Yeah, it sounds like that kind of Chewy, but it was spelled differently.
And there's a bunch of, this is kind of the one I got. There's a whole bunch of brands that it all seems like it's coming from the same company, but it's Pepper Jobs. So you think it'd be Prepper, but it's
Job?
actually Pepper Jobs.
Yeah.
Mini computer. It's got 8 gigabyte of DDR4, 64 gigabyte of memory. Then I added a 500 gig card in for like another $30. Let's see, 4K at 60 dual band. I'm not sure. Can I share my screen? Have we tried that? Is there a way to do that?
Yeah, down at the bottom, one button to the right of your video camera button should be a little monitor with an arrow up in it.
Local video, extra camera, presentations.
Local.
No. To the left of that, that was the add source. Go left of it, 2 buttons. Share screen.
Enable screen share. Oh, hey, we are getting all sorts of techie here. There we go. See if that came up.
Not yet. Oh,
so are you running like WSJTX and logging software and the usual stuff like that?
Yeah, so logging software and in FT8, and so I've even loaded all of my RT system software on here.
Yep.
So
nice.
I have all my cables, so I can reprogram all my radios in the field. And so I'm kind of using it as like that catch-all. I've loaded all my manuals on there because I got the space now.
I bumped into somewhere along the way, someone was making a Raspberry Pi for a ham radio project, and they put Wikipedia on the drive, and I thought, like, wait a minute, that doesn't sound right. You think there'd be like too much data to put all of Wikipedia on, like an SSD.
Like 2 gig or 2 terabytes or something.
They make a version of Wikipedia that, so there's, and I'm trying to think of the name of the company now, but back in my a few years ago when I ran a nonprofit organization, we actually had Raspberry Pis, and they were like mini self-contained libraries that would serve up as a hotspot so people could log into it. And they had this offline version of Wikipedia that was kind of stripped down, and it was more like the Encyclopedia Britannica. Like it was a limited amount of information. You couldn't look up something really obscure in it, but like all the really good educational stuff was in it. And so you could just dump it on there. In fact, that company, if I can think of the name of them now, they actually have a whole image that you can download that has, just like loads and loads of information, educational programs and stuff. But yeah.
Oh, that's amazing. So John, has that been field tested at this point, or is it still being put together?
It's been backyard tested.
All right.
So I've tested out in the backyard. That's usually what I do. I haven't got it fully out in the field. Like I need to put some mounts in there to hold that monitor in. But yeah, I've been able to run and operate on it, and use it on digital modes. And I'm putting WinLink on there, and any kind of digital mode. I basically just downloaded every, JS8 call and all the Whisper, the JT8, everything there. And so this is kind of what I'm gearing up for. I'm actually going to use it for Winter Field Day. That's kind of the big next event, just to give it a try. But yeah, I just kind of figured out that low power resources make a difference, especially on high traffic. If you're trying to get into somebody and you're running slow, and it's something I feel comfortable with that I can easily fix and monitor in the field and not invest all that time. So,
well, and like it looks pretty rugged too. Even if it's lousy weather, you can snap it shut and it's watertight. So it looks like it'd be rugged.
Yeah, and it'll keep itself warm that way up to a point.
Well, that's true. I found that's the biggest problem. I've built a zillion projecting cases, and half of them generate heat, and that's the biggest problem. Like, okay, now what do? Do you start drilling holes and putting in screens and put a fan in, and now you're not watertight? Plus, that stuff takes up space and causes whine in your transmitter or whatever. So that just snowballs once you start getting into the case thing.
That's why when I do cases, I design everything so if I close the lid and snap it shut, we have more dust here than we have rain. And just anytime you have a port on the outside, whether it's power pole or audio or any type of connector, dust just gets in and messes with it. So I like to know that all my cases, when they're snap shut, they're snap shut. And when I'm operating, then I leave the lid open. And even this one, I noticed it kind of blocks the airflow off one side. I kind of lift it up. Nothing's stuck in there. I just kind of prop it up a little bit because it has passive cooling on the one side. It's probably the graphics or something. So it's definitely things electrucks want to breathe, ironically enough. And the minute we start shoving them in boxes, we stop thinking about what happens when they can't stop breathing, and all of a sudden computer slows down, radio starts drifting, things go wonky and you don't understand why. But yeah, I kind of like to leave everything kind of buttoned up. So that's essentially what I'm working on. Just kind of getting this ready. We got, some family vacations going on, and this summer when I was up at Yellowstone and when we were down at Grand Canyon for the spring, I was like, man, I just don't have a little portable thing because I really need my spare tire in my vehicle. So I don't have the room, to take my spare tire out and put in all the radios.
Sure you do.
Yeah.
Thank you, Thomas. I was trying to figure out a way to
you don't need that.
Slyly slide that in there, and I couldn't figure it out. You beat me to it.
Yeah. So
nice.
So that's what I want as a small enough unit that we're going up to South Dakota area, and there's a whole lot of fun parks there. I could, activate, Rushmore and the Black Hills, and there's a lot of national parks there, the Jewel Caves and stuff. And so I thought, well, when we're having lunch, if I have something I could just quickly throw out and toss a line in the tree or something, I could start doing some park activations. I've passed up on too many parks already this year, just because of usually my loadout consists of the back of an F-250 truck. And that's me considering
that's all you can take is the 250
field. That's my field portable.
See, if you listen to John's podcast, he has videos. He has a whole beautiful methodology for packing and organizing. And one of the things that you said that really tickled me once, you said something like whether your idea is to put your radio gear in a bag, or if your idea of portable is to put it on a pallet.
Exactly. That's your field portable.
Yeah. Pallet, Rod. That's your kind of field operating. You need a pallet tie down to the back of your truck.
You gotta have
that. So that's mine too.
That way you can deploy from the aircraft if you need to.
I give a presentation on Go kits from time to time, and I say to people, Go kits come in various shapes and sizes. You can have a Go kit that weighs 1 pound. You can have a Go kit that weighs 50 pounds. But you have to consider how you're going to transport it. Do you need to carry it in one hand? Do you need to carry it in two hands? Does it need a crew of roadies and 3 trucks?
Sure. I just default to a 60-foot diesel pusher. That's it.
Yep.
Yeah. That's my style of glamping.
That's a no-go kit.
A Globestar transport
pallets on the air.
That's what I was thinking.
Well, then you can have several pallets
on the air. That's good.
Pallets on the air. That's
awesome.
Very good way to put it.
Hey, I know somebody that flies one of those.
So now we have
that's
the
great.
rules. The rules for pallets on the air is all your operating has to start on a standard 4x4 pallet.
That's right.
That's the only rule.
Antenna and all.
All right.
What a restriction that would be. Yeah.
And then there's also
right.
the life at terminal velocity, which is, operating in the air, not on the air. On the air, in the air. Anyway.
You're talking about Carlos?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, we're trying to get Carlos here on the show to talk about
we got Carlos coming.
Why in the world does he jump out of an airplane with a radio? So
I operated him.
More to follow.
I worked him while he was in the air once.
Oh yeah, he's an awesome guy. Hey, thanks, John. That's great. Rod, let's rotate around over to you. What's on the bench there?
Alrighty, so a little bit of a different thing, but gentlemen, I'm going to talk about something that we all face someday, and this is typical
Hair loss.
With genuine hands. Yeah, well,
maxed out credit cards
article will be sometimes later, but let's talk about the problem of men of a certain age.
Gallbladders.
Oh, here we go.
75. Ask your doctor if 75 meters is right for you.
Exactly. So just like accumulating radios, you tend to accumulate tools. And if you're anything like me, I feel badly about getting rid of tools. So I've realized that I have a baby mechanic's chest down in the smaller workshop downstairs. I've got a gigantic mechanic's chest out in the garage. I've got various bags. Any people, if you've ever listened to this show, you know I've got bags. So does George. And we've got them filled with stuff. And
Going to give them away?
At some point, you really have to look at culling the herd. And because I started opening, I realized that my actual large tool chest out in the garage is kind of full in some of the drawers. And a man does not need more than 100 pliers.
You shut your mouth.
I know.
T-shirt in there somewhere.
I'm talking heresy out here, folks.
What kind of screwdrivers do you have?
Robertson all the time. If you haven't got Robertson screwdrivers, you're doing it wrong. And those heretics that call them square drive, I can't help you.
Robertson screwdriver.
I don't think the U.S. and Canada have ever come closer to having a war than over these darn screw
Well,
heads.
hold on. Because if you live in Florida, you can find Robertsons because in the winter, half of Ontario goes there.
Goes down there.
There's a well-documented fact that on film crews, when work was migrating to the U.S., Canadian film crew riggers would go and use Robertson drives because they had to get hired back to undo the set because they were the only ones with the square bits.
That's hilarious.
So sure enough, we've got into a screwdriver show already here. But going back to the pliers, it's the fact that I keep stuff that I've had. I've got my dad's tools, right? Like I've got my grandfather's tools. You can't get rid of this stuff, but you really do have to. And then it's further complicated by the fact that some people that are moving, that are good friends of mine.
I got one of those.
So did I.
Yeah. Sent out a lovely, lovely gift. And for those on camera, you will see that this is a Weha. They have, speaking of Advent, they put these Advent calendars together. And you get like 25 pieces of something in a bag that is in this really cute Advent calendar for big boys and girls. And you get to open them up and, now mind you, when you're working on your like 20th bit of the same variety, then you start to clue in what the next bit is going to be. But this was a lovely set. Thank you, George. We all appreciate this going out. This is pretty damn awesome. But it actually single-handedly caused me to re-examine where my tools are and how to rejig this. And instead of getting rid of them in some crass garage sale at the end of my driveway, I've started putting together kits for my kids and for a couple of key individuals that might not have the tools that they should have, some of the younger programmers and that kind of thing that are in at my workplace. So it's been really fun to do that. but I've almost felt like I needed to go buy tools to complete kits. So that became counterproductive. Suffice to say, I'm starting to disassemble a lot of the too many pliers drawers and put together tools, even old tool bags that I've got. I highly recommend that. This is so therapeutic, that you do this for at least your kids and for other deserving folks, because people need good tools. My daughter just went off to her second year of university, when one traditionally moves out of the on-site residences and into your very own my first townhouse with a group of way too many other girls. And when we went to deliver her stuff in the back of my pickup truck, I brought along this toolkit and handed it to her, and big smile on her face, she says, "Oh, that means I'm like the dad of the whole house now." So yeah.
Question is, how is she at bad puns?
She's working on it, but she's
Okay.
far too young. She's far too young for that right now. She groans appropriately whenever I tell a joke. So that's always good.
Off to a good start.
When you're sorting things out, be diligent. I mean, one needs a mobile toolkit, one needs a backpack toolkit, one needs a go to field day toolkit, because you don't want to give your field day toolkits away. These are all things that you are prepared to sacrifice when Bob runs off with the only screwdriver of a certain kind. You can replace that, but don't make it warehouse stuff. That would be tragic. And
No, that's what Harbor Freight, or apparently Princess Auto, is for.
Yes,
Princess
that's right.
Auto. Yes, absolutely. So yeah, so that's what I've been doing is going through the garage, getting rid of stuff that way, learning to hang up things in really odd ways. And the side, everything's fastened to the garage wall, it seems these days, which is kind of nice. And but I haven't actually produced anything, because my intention is to have a bare workbench out in the garage that I can actually do work this winter. So that's pretty much where I stand.
So can I
Very
tell a
good.
funny story on that advent calendar?
Go ahead.
So right before George sent us these advent calendars as a very kind gift. Thank you very much, George. I have mine right here. It's the same kit that Rod was talking about, with all the bits and everything and the handles. It's a very nice kit. But right before George sent this to us, excuse me, I was researching hand tools on Amazon. And I noticed that the kit was shipped in an Amazon box, I think, if I remember correctly. Anyway, I was researching hand tools on Amazon, and I was looking for something. I don't remember what it was, but I didn't order it. At least I was pretty darn sure that I didn't order it. So I got this box, and am I going nuts? Because I swear I did not order that. Apparently I did. And it came in like this big, flat, like 2 inches tall, but like 4 foot wide by 2 foot tall. I mean, it's just this huge, flat thing. It looked like a poster. And my wife is like, "Did you order a poster from Amazon?" And I got it out, and I started taking it apart. I'm like, an advent calendar? Oh, apparently the tools I ordered were an advent calendar. Who knew? And I started taking it apart, and I'm like, these weren't the tools I was looking at. And so, like, it took a solid half an hour for me to figure out that something was going on that it wasn't what I had expected it to be. And then I finally figured it out, and I texted George, and I thanked him, and we laughed hysterically.
So
don't forget, it comes with the bottle opener as well.
The glow-in-the-dark bottle opener.
Seriously? I did not know that.
Yes.
Oh my goodness.
It is a glow-in-the-dark bottle opener.
Yes, thank you, Santa George.
It's true German engineering at its best. Of course, they have to ship a bottle opener with the screwdriver. So just to kind of explain, I had to briefly explain how in the world I happen to come about these things. So there's a store here in the middle of Silicon Valley called Olander. And Olander is an industrial fastener supply store. So if you want to buy any kind of screw, nut, washer, bearing, whatever, go to Olander and they'll sell it to you by, how many thousands of nuts or screws or whatever do you want. They're great. And they've been there forever. And so when you go to the will call desk, behind the will call desk, they happen to carry some tools, but there are very few brands, and it's a curated set of tools. So they have these Wera screwdrivers, and they have Exolite screwdrivers and Nipex cutters. I mean, there's like 4 brands they carry. Anyway, so it's great stuff, and it's all stuff you look at and go, "Yeah, someday I'm going to buy that $100 screwdriver, but not today." And I noticed they had this little pouch with a handle and bits. And just on a lark, I said, "Well, how much is that little kit?" And I expected it to be like $100 or something like that. And the guy's like, "They're $40 or $45 or something like that." I said, "Really? For like the whole kit?" And I was like, "Yep." And I said,
Some
"Wow."
assembly required.
I said, "Well, like how many? Oh, I'll take one." And then I thought, actually, I know some guys who like these. How many you got? And he's like, "Oh, actually, we got a few left." And I said, "All right." And so he brings the box over, and it is a bit, as Mark described it, it's a cardboard box, but it's an advent calendar with Santa Claus image on it, and it's got the little doors,
straight up Norman Rockwell.
Exactly. And you pop open the door, and there's the number 10 Torx bit, and you open another door, and there's the handle, and so it's my kind of advent calendar.
Yeah.
So anyway, let's put it this way: by the time we were done, I bought all of them because they were so cheap. I thought, oh my God, I felt a little embarrassed. Like, I'm sure they're thinking, like, who is this weird dude who's buying all these screwdrivers?
If you work at a shop like that, I guarantee you they understand perfectly.
Well, yeah. Good point.
Yeah.
Good point.
If you do work at a shop like that, can you tell George so that we get more stuff?
That's right.
Yeah. So big props to Olander. So if you're ever in Silicon Valley and need to order, 4,000 nuts or whatever, that's the place to go. They're great.
So the thing to keep in mind here too is that Wera does this every year, and it is a steal. Like, if you look at the regular value of this thing, but they sell out like crazy. We have a place here in Toronto that stocks them, and they'll put a stack from the floor to like the top of your head of it, and they will sell out in a couple of days.
Well, a pallet load.
Well, and I think pallet, yeah, I think they're on sale because it's like the Christmas box, and here we were in like May or June or whatever, and they're like blow them out. So anyway, so there's the screwdriver saga. Troy, I think you're last man standing here on the what's on your workbench, and it looks like a whole bunch of stuff from the picture. So
Yeah, it is a whole bunch of stuff.
What's on your workbench?
It's actually storage now, not a workbench. For some reason, my workbenches I clean them off, and they seem to stay clean for maybe 30 seconds or so, and all of a sudden stuff starts appearing. So I don't know how that works. Yeah, I've got a few things going on. First, I wanted to get a hotspot, and I know there are plenty of them that you can get from the carriers, and you can use your phone as a hotspot. But I wanted something that didn't use all my phone data, and that I didn't have to pay a subscription fee for. So I found this um, little orange thing. It's called a Solus Lite, and it's you can buy gigabytes of data for it in packages, and they never expire, and so you don't have to pay um, a monthly fee. And it will, when you turn it on, it looks for the strongest signal from Verizon, AT&T, and I think T-Mobile. So it'll try to find the strongest signal from those 3 carriers, and it works really well. And I've been really happy with it. So
And what does it do? I missed that part. I'm sorry.
it's a Wi-Fi hotspot that uses 4G LTE.
Okay.
It's not a phone. It's a burner phone for hotspots.
Right. And I've got maybe
So
20
cool.
gigabytes loaded, and the data was not that expensive. And I only use it occasionally, so I didn't want to pay a subscription fee.
So is it is the cost per gig better than what you'd pay on your cell phone plan, or is it on the cell phone plan you're going to pay the fee every month, so this way you don't have to?
You don't have to pay the fee every month. The yeah, somebody's putting the link up, but they're not cheap. The gigs aren't cheap, but if you only use it occasionally and it never expires, and occasionally they'll send me an email, 20% off or 30% off, a package of 5 GB this month or whatever. So sometimes I use that opportunity to kind of stock up on those things. Yeah, so that's kind of my newest toy.
So what hotspot are you going to use with that?
It is a hotspot.
Oh no, I thought you were talking when you said okay. So I'm using the word in the wrong way. I was thinking you were thinking or talking about doing a DMR or something like that hotspot to connect to your hotspot.
I have used my All-Star
Uh-huh.
hotspot. So when I went to Dayton, I had this in my truck, and I had my All-Star hotspot in the truck plugged in, and so I was able to use that from Atlanta to Dayton. So
Oh,
that was
nice.
kind of cool. Yeah, and I mean, just for general field use, out in the field to be able to send emails or whatever. So it's nice.
All
Um,
right.
the next thing that I've kind of been working on is I've kind of have collected a variety of antennas. I've got a DX Commander, I've got a Buddy Stick Pro, I've got a QRP Guys DS1, I've got a Pactena 9-to-1, I've got a Homebrew 49-to-1, I've got a Wolf River Coils, and I've got a Chameleon Impasse 2.0. And what I want to do is try to figure out some method to take those out, pick a Saturday and take them out to a park somewhere, put them up, and maybe use Whisper or some other method, and compare all of them and um, see how they compare. And you know, I- the Pac-10 9-to-1 is by far my favorite field antenna.
Good answer.
Cha-ching.
And so I was thinking about using that as kind of the baseline to normalize everything. But yeah, I would, as we get into this, I'd love to kind of maybe kick around some ideas on maybe how to do an effective test with those. And I know it's hard to get a really truly objective test without a antenna test chamber, but
Well, actually,
yeah,
we did something like that in our club. It was really fun. We can talk about that. Let's make that a
sure,
topic. We can
sure.
come back around to.
The next thing I've been working on is I think most people know that the simulated emergency test is coming up October 1st. So I was asked to be on the planning team for our local organization here, and it, for somehow I've got to be the guy owning the plan. So I've been creating the plan for set, and I'd love to kick that around with you guys too, and see what kind of ideas you might have around that, because it's a difficult balancing act to try to get a really effective test and exercise, but still make it simple enough that you kind of get maximum involvement from everybody.
Oh,
And
that's
then
interesting.
the last thing is I found this piece of software called Ion 2G. I don't know if you guys have ever heard of it. It's basically an ALE software, and I kind of loaded it up and configured it and started playing with it, and it's actually pretty fascinating.
Can you
Um,
explain what ALE is, please?
Automatic link establishment. So what this thing does is you can download. They call them code plugs, but you can download configuration files that might have a list of, say, a dozen HF frequencies in it, and it will cycle through each of these frequencies, trying to test the network to understand which frequency at the time you're running it might have the best chance of best signal to noise ratio, basically. And so it's kind of fascinating because you can put in a contact, assuming you have something scheduled with somebody. They run the software, you run the software. Everybody goes through and tests, and then it decides how to link you up on the best frequency out of that list that it's been given. And so it's really interesting, and I've been having fun playing with it. And then the last thing is I started.
The military uses it a lot because
Yeah,
their HF operators are not necessarily educated enough in propagation to know that trying 10 meters at 3 in the morning is probably not.
Well,
Right.
they don't want to be. They want to pick up the handset and push the go button and then talk to somebody. They don't want to be looking at propagation charts and trying to figure it out.
Yeah, this particular software it's got a really nice user interface, and I think it's just fun to play with.
So is that something that might cross over into your thinking about the simulated emergency test? Do they use
Yeah,
ALE in that?
I think we could, but I don't think we're going to do it this time. I think that's just way out on the far end of the spectrum of what we would want to try to do in our in our set. So yeah, it's I think it may be something fun that we could inject at some point as we get more experience. And then I started tinkering around with Node-RED, which has kind of been fun playing with that as well.
Yeah. Mike's a big Node-RED fan.
Yeah.
He's been trying to educate me.
Down with
It's
the
very cool.
RS-232.
Yeah.
Well, we have Kyle AA0Z coming on in a little bit of time to talk about Node-RED as well with us, right?
Yeah. I just listened to the episode today. I guess the replay from Bacon with his talk.
We'll actually do a talk tomorrow at 1 o'clock Eastern, where Dave WO2X, who with me was the author of the article on QST, is going to give an overview, just explaining what is Node-RED and what can I do with it and stuff. Now he's gone crazy, but just to show you how we've integrated so many different types of hardware.
Well, what I'd obviously heard about Node-RED before. What really started me thinking about it and kind of kicked me off on it was we're going to use Vera for our mode for our set, and we were trying to think about how can you transmit documents, but without having, if somebody at a remote site needs a document, how can they request that document and get it automatically? And I started thinking about, could you run FTP over Vera? And I think it probably is possible at some level. But then I started to think, well, what if you could use Node-RED? Could you use Node-RED over Vera? So that's what started the whole chain of
IP addressable, of course. Yeah.
Yeah. So
or that in Mosquito, MQTT.
Yeah. Oh yeah, I didn't think about that.
Which is just a simple way to send a command, but
yeah,
there's more and more showing up, and the Flex guys really started into it because the radio is really designed to do that. But they're ICOM stuff is making it into. But that's only the radio control is only like 5% of it, right? It's controlling Georgia's state.
So that's it for me.
WinLink has that.
What's that?
I was going to say WinLink. I mean, you can email something. With WinLink, you can email for weather maps. And weather data.
Can. And there used to be something called FTP mail where you could send an FTP over email, and the FTP mail server would respond back with a attachment based on whatever you asked for. And I have tried my best to find that server software, and I have not been able to find it. It's got to be something somewhere, some open source. And I know the NOAA, NOAA, I know they use it, but I've not been able to find the software to be able to do that. So anyway, that's it for me. And George, what's on your workbench?
Not a whole lot, actually. My workbench is in the same vein as Thomas's workbench, which is the mini workbench. What do we call it? The tiny house workbench. The trailer life workbench.
The tiny bench.
The tiny bench. So I mentioned on a previous show, I'm moving. I'm selling my house here in Silicon Valley and moving. And so the bench is in boxes in a pod somewhere in a storage facility. So I held back exactly enough stuff to fit into a nylon gear bag, of course, Rod, a nylon gear bag. So I have my bench is approximately 12 inches by 18 inches by 8 inches right now. So
who makes the gear bag?
Cube.
Yes,
You know,
I want to know too.
that's a great question. I'm afraid it's not a top tier brand. So Thomas, you'd be very disappointed.
What?
Yeah,
It's,
Thomas
yeah.
would know.
If I said Tom Bin, would it make you feel better?
Red Ox or Tom Ben?
It's
Yes.
yeah, exactly. Red Ox.
That's the
Maybe
answer I
Leaf
was
Point.
expecting.
So yeah, the Gucci of gear bags. So I don't know. I bought it on Amazon. It's a black bag. It's a nylon bag. But anyway, so I got two of them. One of them holds the Workbench, and the other one holds the 705 HF station and all the accessories that go with it. So so the Workbench is all packed up, and thank goodness for the Analog Discovery 2. Oh, by the way, we fixed our Analog Discovery 2 discount coupon. I forgot to mention that at the top of the show. So if you want to get a discount on your Analog Discovery, about 35% off, Ham Radio Workbench 2022 will work now. Also, by the way, while I'm at it, I've been talking to the Digilent guys. They're coming out with a new product later this year that it sounds pretty cool. That's complementary to the Analog Discovery, and we'll have them on to talk about that. But anyway, it's a modest selection of hand tools and a meter and a soldering iron and an anti-static mat. So not a whole lot. So I did manage to put in there also my station controller, the latest version of that. So it's built up. So hopefully I don't have to do much construction, but it'll be more coding and node reading and firmware and that sort of thing during the transition as we're moving to the new place. And that's going to take a while. Rod?
And here I thought that your Workbench was going to be contained in the trailer.
Oh, well,
somebody
yeah.
was hauling the trailer behind you.
Well, the trailer would be very luxurious, but the trailer's in trailer storage. And so if I need to just work on a board, it's kind of a pain to go get the trailer. But, you know, if I had a whole weekend, then yeah, that would be that would be a good point. So I think one of the things we want to do in a future episode, Thomas and I have been talking about how we take his Murphy bench concept and my Workbench in a bag concept and have a whole show just about like the mini bench.
Mm-hmm.
And I know in the past we've done some fun shows that are like, okay, create a bench for $200. You know, what would you buy? Kind of a thing. And so here's a case where I didn't have a financial cap, but I have a space cap. I have a volume cap of about a cubic foot. And so I had to figure out like, okay, what goes in the escape pod? You know, what could you absolutely not live without? And what made it in the bag and what didn't make the cut? And that'll be fun to kind of go through the list of items that made it to the 1 cube.
So the Milwaukee pack out was too big.
Yeah.
No, it's never too big. But I think something the size of an R2D2 would be about right. It would be ejected with you in the pod.
Yeah. So I refer to my set of black nylon bags as my escape pod. So I have the Workbench escape pod unit. I've got the HF radio bag. I've got the HT bag, which is surprisingly big, by the way. The HTs are tiny. The problem I found with your portable HT bag is, first of all, you don't have one HT. You got 3.
Correct.
Bandolier,
at least.
please.
Okay. They breed if you leave them alone on your desk overnight.
That's right. You have to have at least 2 or 3. Each one has to have a drop-in charger. Each one has to have a backup battery. Each one needs a programming cable. Each one plus there's like 4 hotspots, and there's a battery for the hotspots. And next thing you know, like the radio is about 10% of the volume of the radio bag. So it's all the other support infrastructure for the portable HT. Anyway, so that's a bag. And then there's a computer bag that's got, you know, the usual computer stuff.
But all of this has to be in bags so that you can, hey, we're doing a house showing, disappear for 2 hours.
That's right.
Yeah.
Actually, it has to all, you know, toss in the bag and get out of Dodge. And and there's a podcast bag, which is the smallest of all of them. It's like the mic and the mixer and a few things. So it's all very portable. And so I'm going to experience what it's like to live in a very small space for a while and see how that goes. So the good news is at the end of that tunnel is a much bigger space. So I'm not too worried about it.
So I'm actually building a shop in my backyard, which I probably should have mentioned in my what's on your Workbench section. I've been planning on this for months now, but we finally got the plans through the city. And so the builder has the finalized plans and is working on getting me a quote. But it's going to be a big big for me, dedicated space. Outside dimensions are 14 by 36 feet, and it'll be entirely dedicated to me. About 1/3 of it's going to be an office with my computer, radio, electronics workbench, and some other things. And then the other 2/3 of it is going to be a shop with, the big dirty workbench, a whole lot of storage, and some other dedicated workspaces for things. And so it's kind of
George in there.
Yeah,
that's right.
Can I sublet for a while?
You are subletting for a while, actually,
Well, that's
because
true, actually.
part of what's going to be in there, depending on how long it takes you to unpack in Oregon, is
The only word you left off was man cave.
No, yeah, it's going to be more work than man cave. The most man caviness of it is going to be I will have my sim racing rig out there, and since it is my own space and I don't have to share audio with the wife and daughter who fundamentally disagree on music styles with me, I will finally be able to put up some speakers and not be forced to use nothing but headphones. So I'll be putting up some nice speakers and probably building a tube amp and all kinds of fun things. I'll be able to experiment with audio again.
Very nice.
For those a nice set of baby Advents.
Yeah. For those of you that recall the old Get Smart series, does anybody remember where the agent, I don't remember the name of the agent.
99.
But no, it was the guy that would be like living in a garbage can or living in a closet or somewhere. And so you would go to your workshop, Mark, you would open a door and there's George there ready to answer your question.
That's right. That's right. Yeah.
That's a little too creepy there, Rod.
Well, that's all the time we have tonight, folks, before we get any creepier.
So that's really exciting, Mark. I can't wait to see that. And you're going to start charging me rent for storing of Pactena gear.
I'm already charging you on per unit sold. So
So thank goodness
we got that figured
for those
out.
of you who are buying Pactenas, Mark is filling the orders, which is just awesome. So I really appreciate that. Thank you.
Except for the fact that haven't filled anything for the last 2 weeks for fear of not wanting to spread cooties to anybody. For those who aren't following me on Twitter or whatever, I tested positive for COVID a little over 2 weeks ago. Took the antivirals and everything else, but I've been in isolation and trying to rest a whole lot, but more importantly, not shipping anything out. I did have one day where I was negative after the antivirals before the rebound kicked in, where I was able to get a few things out, but I think there are a whole lot of orders that George has waiting for me. So I tested negative for the first time this morning. 48 hours puts me till Sunday. So assuming everything is still negative by Monday, everything that's backed up is going out.
Fingers crossed for that.
Fingers crossed.
All right. So this is the short intro to the show. We've only been at it for an hour and 40 minutes or something. So I think we need to take a break for about a minute or two, and then we'll come back and we'll jump into Q&A from the audience and see what kind of questions Troy has for us. So officially, we're going to take about what, Vince, a 1 minute break?
About 90 seconds, which will allow those of us who need to stretch our legs a chance to do so. Some of us will stay here. We'll continue to entertain the live stream audience, of course.
Then don't go away during the break.
With our stories. So don't go away. We'll be right back.
I can address a question from earlier in the stream there.
Yeah, go ahead.
One fellow was asking, how do you know if a loop is horizontal? And it's pretty simple. If the plane of the loop is roughly parallel to the ground, it's horizontal. Another fellow asked if the performance of a horizontal loop is seriously impacted by proximity to an asphalt and wood framed roof on a house or a structure, and essentially it is not. Whenever you're putting a horizontal loop or whatever, anything in an attic or on top of a roof, proximity to big metal chunks like air conditioners or house wiring plays into it. But if you don't want to put a horizontal loop in your attic, I've seen people tack them to the outside of their asphalt shingled wood frame roofs and kind of glue them down with, roof tar, and very carefully run the feed point over the edge and into the shack or through the soffit into the house, whatever. A horizontal loop tends to work very well just underneath or on top of an asphalt roof. And I'm speaking from decades of having one. I don't have one quite like that right now, but I did, and I really miss it.
A family member of mine built a multi-band, a fan dipole, and he floated it 3 or 4 inches above the roof with black painted standoffs. He used black wire, and it was a 3 or 4 band, I guess a fan dipole would roughly describe it. And he had reasonably okay performance with it, given, it was 20 feet off the ground, and it was cut for 80, 40, 20, and 10, and of course it resonates on 15 as well. He was pretty happy with it. I was pleased that he got on the air, and the HOA still doesn't know it's there.
Yeah, you can be pretty sneaky.
Yeah,
so
indeed.
I just wanted to comment on the beverage antennas, by the way. While we're in our pause, I just brought up 160 meters on FT8. I've never copied Israel before.
Oh, wow.
Wow.
So do you see that on your screen?
Minus 18 right now. Yeah.
Is that a showable?
Wow, that's pretty good.
A way to show that. So when I run remote, I run a PC radio, and you can see here on JTDX that I'm copying them anywhere between band conditions are probably reasonably good.
So he's minus. I can't see this. The text is too. There we go.
There we go.
Oh, 4x1 UF. There you go.
Eventually the producer figures it out.
Minus 22.
So we'll call him. Add him, because that will be a new country for me.
We're going to watch history being made here.
At least for me.
I think working Israel on 160 is a miracle no matter what you do or who does it.
I'm in Toronto, so...
you're a whole bunch closer.
He's up to minus 12.
Holy moly.
No, that's... no, that's not him, though. That's somebody else. K8AGB.
Copying me.
Yes, folks, live, we're ruining ham radio.
as if this mode was not slow enough in person.
Yeah.
There's no FT4.
Now there's 8 people staring at it.
I was
a couple thousand other people.
I was glamping recently, and I'm like, I've got all kinds of signal coming in. Why the heck is something not decoding? And I actually had to look up the answer, and the clock on my PC was off. I wasn't paying attention to the little display thing at the bottom that shows where it was in the cycle, and listening to the audio. But that was quite a learning for me to make sure my clock was accurate again. So of course, I set my VFO to 10 megahertz. And just before we do that, George, is George willing to share where he's moving as a question?
Yes.
And Harry, there's your answer. Thanks for coming out this evening.
Do you have a follow-on question? Yeah. So I'm moving to the Portland area, not in Portland, actually, about 20 miles from there, south and east of Portland, actually near Oregon City. It'll be actually a bit, not even in Oregon City. It's out of there too. So I'm trying to achieve some level of rural environment like Thomas without the lack of internet. So that was a hard line. There is no option of going someplace without high-speed internet. So yeah, it'll be about 20 miles southeast of Portland. Now, why Portland? Perhaps someone might say, well, there's a lot of trees, there's a lot of hiking trails, there's a lot of beautiful landscape, all things I love to do. I don't really want to look out my back window and see my neighbor's kitchen. I want to look out and see something like a tree, and just sort of be kind of out of the Silicon Valley. And Silicon Valley is a great place to be while you're in school and, working hard and all that. And I'm still working hard. I just don't need to be any place in particular. As long as I've got access to an airport and an internet, I can work anywhere. So that all works out fine. And it's a great food scene in Portland. So seems like a nice place to be.
And so I have a question from Katie6JL, who's actually working with me offline. Do they have DMR there?
They do, in fact. There's actually a pretty big group. It's the Pacific Northwest something or another network, and there's about 8-9 DMR repeaters right in the Portland metro area. There's probably more. Just that one group alone has got that many on their network. So there's quite a few.
Is it the same network that's up in Seattle?
Yeah, I think it's I want to say it is. I'm not 100% sure, but I think it's the PNW, Pacific Northwest, whatever it's called. And yeah, I think it's all part of the same. I believe it's a Seabridge network, which is kind of unfortunate because all the DMR stuff I'm on is on Brandmeister, so that's a little bit of a complication. So I don't know how that's going to sort out, but that's why they make hotspots. So for the next handful of months or whatever, I'll be doing a lot more living on a hotspot than real radio, but it's better than nothing.
So all George, right. I'm registering that URL right now, the Pacific Northwest something or other network.
Exactly. I'm not a very good ambassador for that yet. So I do know a couple of hams up in the area, so that's really awesome. At least I'll know a few people.
Well, CPAC is up there.
That's right. Yeah, CPAC's about an hour and a half from Portland. So, in fact, when we were up there recently, we drove out to the coast and up and back and drove right by where it's at. So, yeah, it's an easy drive.
How tall is your tower going to be?
I'm going to be in the HOA, so I'm not going to have a tower.
The trees are 112 feet tall.
If only you knew somebody who knew something about putting up antennas in stealthy ways.
Kirk, I may have to contract you to assist me.
He's got the welding supplies.
If only we knew for sure that nobody else in his HOA was a listener.
Yeah. Well, the funny thing is, actually, I did. Frank, K4FMH did as of course Frank would, because he knows how to do this sort of thing, did a search for hams in the neighborhood, and he found one in the development, but I haven't seen a tower, so he may be. I don't know if he's active or not.
And George, I think you've mentioned there's only 70 people in the HOA, so I am expecting at a schedule of 1 plate of cookies per week that within a year and a bit we can get that whole voting block done.
Yeah, exactly.
So how many sequoias do you have in the yard?
Yeah. So thanks.
How many sequoias do you have in the yard, George?
There's cedars and there's hemlocks and there's at least some Doug firs. So there's quite a variety of big, tall trees that are very good for stealthy.
Grind up the hemlocks for the neighbors and go with the cedars for your...
I was just considering the immortal words of Socrates, who said, I drank what?
If you have big trees, you have plenty of stealth, so you'll be fine.
Yeah. There's a lot of trees, and they're pretty big. So I figured some 26 gauge wire, I could build all kinds of stuff.
Yep. Do you go with 26 gauge black nylon or black fishing leader braided stainless? Otherwise, the wire will break when the trees blow around. But the downside to the stainless is birds will fly into it. So you'll see birds laying in the grass, sleeping periodically. But I think it's a small sacrifice.
Forever sleep.
Yeah.
So, George, to answer your question of a couple minutes ago, our 60 seconds is over, but we've just touched on something I wanted to bring up tonight, which was gauge of wire on antennas and how to compute power handling. So maybe when we come back in, we'll just mention this little quick break conversation we've had, and we'll pick it up there before we go over to Troy with his questions. Can we do that?
You bet.
All right. Then, in this case, we're back in 3, 2, 1. And so here on the break, So here on the
Waiting
break,
for the George introduction.
we're waiting for the
Welcome
George
back.
introduction.
Yeah,
Hey,
well,
so this is
apparently
live
I missed my
podcasting,
cue. Yeah,
folks.
this is
That's
live.
that's quite all right. So yeah, on the break we just had. So thank you for bearing with us through our break. The topic of wire antennas and how to keep them stealthy and still strong enough came up, and recently on my glamping trip I was experimenting with, sounds so much better than screwing around, with end-fed antennas and some other things. And I was using some 30 gauge wire, and somebody commented to me, well, gee, it probably doesn't have power handling capacity for 100 whiskeys. So then I got down a deep, dark bunny hole about how do I compute this? And why does the number 26 gauge keep coming up? I couldn't find any answers to that. So that's the question I wanted to open with, maybe before we turned it over to Troy for all his questions. So
I have a
anybody.
I have a suggested method. So what you do is you put the antenna up, and you just drop 1,000-watt carrier on it. Choose a deadband at night.
I know where he's going with this.
And then you look along the length of the wire with
And
an infrared camera
and see if it's glowing.
See where the hot spots are, and then measure the temperature and make your decision accordingly.
Well, so if an end-fed half wave, it should be about halfway along, right? A dipole would be at the ends.
You know, it's hard to say. The transformer will probably incinerate first.
That's true. All right. So why is 26 gauge the number that keeps coming up? Why is that so popular as the choice for, end-feds or portable operations?
I think that's the sweet spot between thickness and low visibility and strength. It's kind of the convergence of, those factors. But if you're like George and you have sequoias in the backyard, sequoias can do a lot of movement if you get the wire in the tippy tops of the trees.
Sure.
So sometimes even that stuff breaks unless you go with a braided stainless and get very serious about it, or unless you have to make some friends with some arborists who are willing to climb, without charging you the price of a new tower.
All right.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, by the way, that's the same. The reason I was using that wire is exactly what you're saying, Kirk. I was looking for what's a decent quality antenna wire that is exactly that. It's low visibility, but reasonable strength, and that was ideal. And the stuff that I use is either from the Wireman or from Davis RF. It's basically the same stuff. They make great wire. So I highly recommend that. The same place my supple wire from.
My supple wire, Davis RF Flex Weave. I love this stuff.
Here's a plug from the Midwest. You basically can't go wrong with anything Davis RF makes or sells. It's been pre-vetted by people.
Unless you call it supple, and then it just gets weird.
Oh, Mark.
I've got to say, like the 26 gauge, so many of my antennas, especially, the pack antennas, that stuff is just about perfect. Like when you go for any like larger gauge wire, it just starts to bulk up really quickly in your bag. I mean, it's amazing, like how just like 22 gauge will just start to bulk up in your bag. And so I really like it. And I know that you can drive 100 watts with, 20. I mean, to be honest, like you're saying, it's really the transformer and those things that'll start that you got to watch out for in terms of power handling.
For sure.
People,
by the way,
yeah.
Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Well, no, I was just going to say, like, I actually used 26 gauge wire at a previous place I lived that didn't have it had a homeowners association. It didn't have anything in the documents saying that you couldn't have an antenna yet. And so I didn't want to be the guy that made them put that in there. So we put up a horizontal delta loop under the cloak of darkness with some 26 gauge wire. And I heard all kinds of comments from people. Oh, that's just wrong. There's not going to be enough bandwidth. It's just so small and blah, blah, blah. I worked like the Peter 1D Expedition with 50 watts from my house with that stuff and in single sideband. And if you can reach Antarctica, I was like, I think I'm good
enough.
Yeah, I think this will be fine.
Yeah, fair enough.
The point about the wire's so small, the bandwidth will be narrow is such a fallacy. I mean, that has nothing to do with it. The only time surface area is going to matter is if you make a super large conductor, you're not going to see any difference in wire.
It
diameter.
starts mattering when you're talking about beams and like half inch to 1 inch or 2 inch aluminum piping. But if you're talking about wire,
did a calculation. If you want to put up an 80-meter dipole and you don't want to fool around with any conventional means of increasing the bandwidth, you just make it from 5-foot diameter pipe, and it covers the whole band with less than 2-to-1 SWR. There are some mechanical considerations, however, but
So Kirk,
it's the ratio. So in all seriousness, it's the ratio between the length and the diameter that becomes an issue. And you can accomplish the same thing by making a fan dipole style, but with 2 wires next to it, right? Yeah. Like if you do 2 wires and space them out by 6 inches, that's roughly the same thing as having like a 6-inch diameter conductor. So there are easier ways of increasing the size of your radiator.
Yeah, but not as cool.
Not as cool as a 6-inch pipe. That's true.
No, hey, Mike,
mention any of that in social media, and 47 people will tell you it doesn't work, but they have no experience in it.
Yeah,
because
exactly.
They're I grew up probably like all of us here. I just looked in whatever I had or whatever was on sale. I put it up, and it worked. The 160 I just put up was 500 feet of 14 gauge house wire that was on sale for $100.
Yeah, sure. Anytime anyone says it's not going to work, immediately don't trust them. Yeah. If they start saying you can do it better or that will be less efficient, like, okay, maybe they know what they're talking about, but they're still negative Nancy. Like, you'll be able to make anything work. It may be a compromise to some degree or another, but it's going to work no matter what.
Just like using braided stainless, it's not quite, it's got a little more resistance than copper wire, but it's way stronger and it still works. And so, with all of these kind of stealthy antennas, it's your best antenna is the one that you actually put RF into. Exactly. And so I wouldn't worry about running 100 watts on 26 gauge wire. I've done it before. Not a big deal. Yeah. And if it becomes a fuse, then you just go to 24
I'm
gauge.
running 1,000 on 14 right now.
And so we've all run 100 watts on 26 gauge. Yeah. I guess really the core of my question is, there's some math involved with the I²R and a few other things, and the current handling capacity of the wire. But all of the ampacity charts for American wire gauge are based on DC or AC at 60 hertz, not at 22 megahertz. Right. So I'm trying to understand the current handling capacity and the power handling capacity of the wire at those frequencies, and how we determine, beyond the mechanical and the practical side of this, that yes, 26 gauge works and 14 gauge works for a kilowatt and all that, or the night vision infrared view of where's the wire glowing.
You got to give it the Edison test. Is it a filament or is it an antenna?
All right.
I do want to comment on a couple comments here in the side, in the text. So Curtis says, did I hear it right? 26 gauge, that's tiny. It would be completely relying on its sheath. I would make anyway. So the wire we're talking about is not 100% copper, and the reason it's usable at all is because what's actually in the core of the wire is steel. So some of the strands are steel, and then there's copper.
Copper coated steel.
It's copper coated.
CCS.
So that's the difference. Now you might say then, well, isn't 100% copper better? Yes, but 100% copper, that break. Size will be
stretches.
Much weaker. So the steel gives you about a 25-30 pound strength, as I recall, which is pretty good.
You catch a big bass with that if you had to.
They make some with like a Kevlar core as well. I used to do that with my leftover spider wire fishing line back in the day. Super tough, and I would just string my little 26 gauge wire onto it, and once you're 3 feet away, you can't tell, but then the thing is super strong.
Yep. And
I've used some of that Kevlar spun wire. What I found was that there's not much wire in that wire. There's a lot of Kevlar, at least the stuff that I played with,
Yeah.
and it was very kind of finicky to solder. And man, that stuff was really strong.
But if you make your own, then you've got your pure copper 26 gauge riding on your Kevlar, strength of your choice, and then you can have the best of both worlds.
Has anybody tried electric fence wire? Because it just looks.
Yeah,
I mean the aluminum stuff.
I've used it for just experimenting with antennas and doing some temporary stuff, and it works fine for that. I've never done anything where I've left it up permanently for a long time to see how it would play out. But I mean, I can find that and plentiful that it's kind of nice just to test an idea, for an antenna.
Well, and then there's horse tape too, the wide stuff with a conductor running through it. And there's a company that makes a dipole that rolls up, and it spools out, and it's made of horse tape.
We made a horse tape. I think it was a 160 meter V antenna for field day back in I think 1997, and we hung it off of a fire tower, and it was a pretty cool antenna. It was massive. But that tape's really nice. It is kind of, there's some dynamics about that too. If it's really windy or something, that stuff has some profile for the wind. And but yeah, I think it's Kirk. I think maybe you've said this before in the past that RF got to go somewhere. So if you're pushing RF,
paradox, yeah. RF got to go somewhere. Yeah, I've had good luck with the heavy gauge aluminum electric fence wire. Makes for great antennas. I mean, you can't load it down with a 500-pound tension or it'll stretch a bit. But the other thing is, if you make a dipole or a V from barbed wire or galvanized, the steely fence wire, then it kind of becomes a traveling wave antenna because the internal resistance of the wire gives it the characteristic of like a beverage or like a terminated V, because it has enough internal resistance to make it a traveling wave antenna of sorts. And that's probably not what you want, though.
No, indeed. Well, gentlemen, thank you so much for entertaining my little silly question about I²R and the diameter of conductors. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for coming to this week's episode of All About Wire Antennas. But at this point, our friend Troy K4JDA, our super fan, has come loaded with questions for us. So let's turn the floor over to Troy and see what he's got for us tonight.
I didn't. First of all, a couple things. Every time I go to a ham fest and see the Wireman, I'm like, give me 200 feet of 26 gauge. So I've got several rolls of 200 feet of 26 gauge here, just waiting to build an antenna. And I forgot to mention when I was on my Workbench thing, I found a podcast app for my phone that lets you set the speed to like 1.2 or 1.3, and it's amazing how fast you can get through a ham radio Workbench episode when you have it sped up. And it's funny because after I've gotten used to listening to that, when I hear the normal speed, it sounds really slow. So
yeah, I have that problem with the music because I always listen to George never plays the music when we're recording the podcast. So I only ever hear the music after the whole thing's been put together, and I'm listening to it on my podcast app, and I'm usually listening at 1.5 speed. So I'm hearing it at dun 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 dun.
Well, if you play it too fast, people sound like this too. That's no fun.
Thankfully, it does pitch correction.
It does.
But then I hear George occasionally on a live show. He'll play it, and it just so slow.
Actually, speaking of that, can you believe this? I was mowing my yard and listening to
of course you were
Workbench.
It's what we do.
And I hit I was going to do the speed thing. I usually don't listen at faster speeds for some reason. People should probably do that with my videos, by the way. That is a pro tip. But I found that I hit the button the wrong way, and with a lawnmower, when you're like trying to mow and you got earphones in and all this stuff, and you're sweaty and hot, you hit the wrong thing, and it went to like the half speed, and it is just instant comedy because it makes everyone sound like they've just had a little too much to drink. It does. It has this. It just slurs everyone's speech in this way.
This is only my second drink for the night. Well, only. I usually only do one a night. This is my second for the night, so I might get there before the end of the show.
You might get there.
I have to refill my glass because we've said DMR too many times. I'll be back in a minute.
I will definitely try. I will definitely try the half speed next time, at least for a few seconds. I didn't have this question on my list, but the loop antenna question or topic really interests me because I feel like I need a good receiving antenna, and I've looked at Beverage on the ground or Beverage over ground, but I hadn't really thought. I've looked at I think it's K9AY, which is a vertical kind of
The loop.
diamond thing, but
a triangular loopy thing.
Yeah, it's two of them perpendicular to each other. But I haven't thought about a horizontal loop. So why would you think about a horizontal loop versus?
So a horizontal loop is not your best low band receiving antenna in the sense of a Beverage or like the Gary Breed K9AY loop. Those are low band receiving antennas, kind of like the Beverage, where you don't have a big signal, but you have an improvement in signal to noise ratio. The horizontal loop that I always talk about is more of a DC to daylight, HF antenna that is versatile enough to, it does great domestically on the low bands, and it does very well DX wise on bands that are a little bit higher than the fundamental frequency. So I wouldn't necessarily choose to use a horizontal loop as a low band receiving antenna because the wave angle that it responds to is a little bit high for DXing. Domestically, it's fantastic, but it's definitely not the same kind of antenna as the K9AY.
Okay. So why would somebody want to use a horizontal loop over, a dipole or off center fed dipole or
the benefit of the horizontal loop is twofold. So dipoles, for example, they have kind of a higher order resonance point on every odd harmonic. So let's say a 40 meter dipole has a certain resonance point at 15 meters, but not 20. So with a dipole, it's every odd higher order resonance. Right. With a horizontal loop, you have a higher order resonance on every band that's harmonically related, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And so in that sense, it makes the horizontal loop very easy to match on all bands at or above the fundamental. So it's a very well behaved multi-band antenna. The other reason to have it is, like, let's say you're putting up an 80 meter horizontal loop. On 80 and 40, on 80 meters, you're going to put a big signal domestically. But on 40, where the antenna is now 2 wavelengths long, the takeoff angles start to drop. And so your antenna becomes better and better at DX performance. By the time you get to 20 meters, your 80 meter horizontal loop is about the equivalent of a typical tribander, but in every direction, which can sometimes be a problem if you're trying to hear east and you don't want to hear west. But so basically on the high bands, an 80 meter horizontal loop becomes a great DX antenna, and on the low bands, it becomes a great domestic antenna. It's super easy to match on multiple frequencies. And, there have been suggestions over the years that a low mounted loop is quieter than a dipole. And I don't know that those things are true, but basically the horizontal loop is extremely versatile and well behaved and offers, a higher band performance that, in my experience tends to exceed that of a typical dipole deployed in the same way.
So I'm assuming the answer is yes, but I'm going to wonder why. Does the height matter, and how do you determine, is it always higher is better?
So, height makes right is still in effect. But, the interesting thing, if you put up an antenna, horizontally polarized antennas want to be at least a half wavelength above ground before they work in a quote unquote textbook fashion. And so a quarter wavelength at 80 meters, a half wavelength at 80 meters is very high. And almost nobody except George's new QTH can get them up high enough because we don't have the sky hooks for it. And so if you put a horizontal loop low to the ground, low compared to that half wavelength that you're looking for, the antenna works great domestically on 80, but on the higher bands, it's not so low anymore. So a half wavelength on 20 meters is about 30 feet. And so if your loop is at 30 feet, that 80 meter horizontal loop at 30 feet now becomes a killer DX antenna on 20 and up. And so this somewhat holds true for dipoles as well, but I've had much better experience with the azimuth radiation coverage pattern of a horizontal loop versus a dipole, which has a more pronounced figure 8 pattern, if you will.
And is longer always? I mean, I remember you saying you need to be symmetrical, but is longer always better?
No, it's not always better. So the horizontal loop is so forgiving that the rule of thumb is put up as much horizontal loop as your space will allow, and you can even get away with feeding it with coax at the fundamental frequency and up. If you want to feed the loop below its fundamental frequency, you'll want to feed it with open wire line because the SWR losses will be much less. But so with the base, put up as much horizontal loop as you can, and then feed it with coax on the fundamental and all bands above that, and you'll be fine. Now, in a practical sense, I think there's no reason to put up a horizontal loop bigger than 80 meters, but some guys swear by their 160 meter horizontal loops. And the reason I say that is you've got a certain finite range of higher order resonances that give you usable performance. So an 80 meter horizontal loop works great from 80 through 15 meters. A 40 meter works great from 40 through 10 or 40 through 6. But if you put up a 160 meter horizontal loop, by the time you get up to 15 and 10 meters, some of your azimuthal gain spikes are going to be truly outstanding, on the order of 13, 14, 15 dB versus a dipole, but they're so incredibly spiky that if the other station isn't exactly in one of your spikies, now you're kind of receiving and talking on a dummy load because the nulls are super deep. And so in the real world, put up an 80 meter horizontal loop or a 40 meter. Those two are definitely the sweet spots for multi-band use.
You keep saying you keep saying at a frequency and up, but it's still resonant, correct? So I still need
sort of resonant, right? So if you have an 80 meter horizontal loop, it'll have a close enough for government work resonance at 20. If it's an 80 meter loop, it'll be resonant on 40, 20, 15, 10, 5.5.
Let me rephrase my question. I'm looking at a web page right now that says at 3.8 megahertz, you want your total loop length to be about 264 feet. If I can only put up 200 feet of loop,
you're fine.
Okay.
So
even
put up
even
as
though
much
that's
as
not
you can.
resonant at a given base frequency.
Yeah, the way I do it, one of the best antennas I ever had was a 5 megahertz horizontal loop. And it worked great on 80, even domestically on 160, although I did feed it with open wire line. My favorite antenna back in the day, have the horizontal loop, drop the open wire feed line straight down to the ground. At the ground point, I would have an auto tuner with coax running back to the shack. You can be like me, a crazed band hopper and zippity doo-dah up and down, and and you really have the best of both worlds. So if you are close enough to the band, to like 80 meters, like working 80 with a 40 meter antenna is kind of like the no-no. You definitely don't want to do that unless you're using open wire line, because the SWR losses will be very high. But if you're, within 20, 30, 40% of 80 meters, you'll still almost certainly pull it off and it will be fine.
Yeah,
Kirk, you made a good point though, and new hams may keep this in mind, and maybe you can elaborate on that. In a perfect world, we would love the tuner at the end of the 50 ohm coax in the antenna, and I think I think 100%. I know the world thinks that, hey, my SWR tuner, whatever, my radio sees 1-to-1, so the rest of it's got to be great, but
right,
it couldn't be further from the truth, actually.
Well, the tuner wants to be at the antenna. It doesn't want to be in the shack.
And that's not practical.
Yeah, well, some tuners are small enough to go at the feed point, but you have to really make it happen. And so that's why my compromise over the years that works very well is to just run the open wire feeder down to the ground, put the tuner there, and then the coax back to the shack. And so unless you're talking about incredibly high or weird impedances, in a practical sense, you don't have to worry about SWR losses on open wire line. And so, yeah, the SWR on that line might be 8-to-1 or 10-to-1, but because it's open wire line and not coax, it really doesn't affect your signal to an appreciable degree. But if you had a 10-to-1 SWR on your coax, now you're kind of getting into the dummy load zone, which is why, to keep it as simple as possible, if you're going to feed a horizontal loop with coax, operate it at the fundamental and up. And because the higher order resonances work out to be easy to match, you can keep your tuner in the shack and you're not going to have incredible SWR losses on the feed line.
Yeah, it's interesting you mentioned this because I've had two QTHs with horizontal loop because I like them so much. Actually,
Yep.
The first one was the one that we put up under the cloak of darkness, and then this house, actually, one of my antennas is a horizontal loop, and I enjoy using them. And in both cases, I did exactly what you were talking about, just putting up as much wire as I could. Where I thought it would fit, I put that much wire in. And they've always been extraordinary antennas. They're omnidirectional. So that can be a negative sometimes, especially I was listening to Mike talk about, being able to null out QRN with his Beverage antenna, just having the lightning storms and things that were on the back side of it. So he wasn't hearing all that. You'll hear everything with the horizontal loop antenna, but I found that in an urban setting, I felt like it was a pretty quiet antenna. And I think that the other thing is I've always found that they're easier to hide. They're more stealthy than a dipole even. I feel like because you can really move around where your feed point is. And I do exactly what you're talking about. When I put this loop up here at this house, I have ladder line that comes down to a tuner box I made outside. It's a little LDG Z11 Pro ATU, and I have been using the same discarded 12 volt gel cell in there, which is probably not producing 12 volts, but the LDG tuner could care less. It doesn't need very much. And I have a little 5-watt solar panel with a micro M plus charge controller there. So it's remote. I don't have to give it any other power. That has worked for 11 years in that same sealed box. And then I feed that with some really nice quality coax into my shack. And it has just worked phenomenally well.
It works very well. There's only one thing I'll mention. I have used that exact setup, but on my QTH, unlike yours, once the outdoor temperature hits 10 degrees, the Z11 doesn't work anymore. It's temperature sensitive.
We do get temps down to, I'm at about 3,300 feet here, and so we do get some really cold temps, but I've never noticed that before. I wonder if I've just not paid attention and was running a higher SWR than I thought or something. But
I have the same tuner, and when I was living in the townhouse, I had a horizontal loop in the attic, and so I installed the tuner in the attic just above the access hatch and ran cable TV coax down into the man cave, and it worked great until it got cold, and then it didn't work at all. And I called up LDG and I'm like, what's the scoop? And they're like, oh yeah, it's temperature sensitive. With some of the chips we use in many LDG tuners, they lose their mind at about 10 above. And so mine definitely did. And so I even have the RT100 now, the remote tuner. Mm-hmm. I have a couple of inverted L's in the backyard over a big radial field. And I have to put a heater inside the insulated box at the base of my antenna, or it won't work when it gets to Minnesota temperatures. So that caveat aside,
just key up when it's not tuned up. It'll heat up on its own.
Well, it'll still work on the band that you've previously tuned it on.
That's true.
It latches
into relays.
Mm-hmm. No, the best heaters for those are reptile heaters. They're like $25 on Amazon.
Mm-hmm. I used a couple of 50 watt monolithic resistors, and I did some testing, not as much testing as Dr. Frank, mind you, but I did some testing that I need about 5.5 watts of thermal input into that box. And so I just adjust the voltage that I'm sending down my control wires. And I'd like to have a remote temperature sensor on it, but I haven't gotten there yet. But 10 degrees is the sweet spot.
The operator loses his mind at 10 degrees also.
Yes, if you're doing an FYBO or something, I would agree.
Yeah, for those of us in the field, we tend to stop working at 10 degrees also.
Yeah, exactly.
So there's some good questions in the chat here I want to bring in that are kind of along these lines. Maybe we could do kind of some quick answers on these. Mel asks, are there options for 1.5 kilowatt remote antenna tuners?
I'll take that one.
Homebrew.
Mike,
homebrew.
What do you got?
Flex, I'll wear the Flex Radios. Tuner Genius XL is designed for exactly that, up to 10 to 1 SWR, and it'll handle 2 radios at the same time, actually, in one model.
So can you do that without a Flex radio? Could you
yes, you can.
Yep. Any other brand would work?
Yeah,
is
the
it
Flex
designed
works,
for? Sorry, go ahead.
The Flex works better because it's Ethernet based, but ICOM, Kenwood, Yaesu, Elecraft, Zygu or something, you got to figure it does do RF sensing, but if you're the purist and want to get cat data to it, you'll have to get a little creative. Mark?
But will it work at remotely at like a base of an antenna on a tower?
It needs to be. It's in a standard case. Looks good on the bench, so you'll have to.
Okay, so it is not weatherproofed. It's not designed to live outdoors. How is it powered?
12 volts.
Okay, so you'll need to get 12 volts out to it, as well as whatever control cables, as well as whatever RF. Okay.
And there's a note here that Vince just posted here. So David KO for USA mentioned MFJ, legal limit IntelliTuner, remote automatic antenna tuner. There you go. 1.5 kW. Okay, another comment here, which I thought was pretty interesting. Walter said, let's see, or not that one. There's a question about using antennas in an apartment. Walter said, I live in a small apartment. What's your take on indoor HF antennas? And he further comments that he has wire that's looped inside the house or inside the apartment, and it's working effectively for him. So that's really good news. Do any of you guys have any tips for apartment dweller antennas?
Boy, if he's getting running 30 watts in net control, here's some full points. That's my take on that. Most people would just try a mag loop or a balcony hamstick dipole, but he's gone way beyond that.
A friend of ours did really well with a mag loop with a pixel, not a pixel. Yeah. What did he use, Rod? Alex loop.
Yeah. So I'm going to be able to report personally on the Alex loop, because while I'm in escape pod mode for the next few months, I have my array of Pactenas, but I also I've had an Alex loop for several years, and I hardly ever use it because why? And now I have a reason. So I'm going to actually give it a try from the balcony and see if it works.
And they're easy to make your own. You can make your own version of it quite easily.
Oh yeah, yeah. Oh, for sure.
So with a magnetic loop antenna, keep it away from stuff, because it really wants to couple to the environment. Mm-hmm. And so, some guys on skyscrapers, they're like, oh, I've got a great balcony. It's like, well, it's got a steel railing and steel walls and steel beams. And that's generally the kiss of death for a mag loop. But if you can keep it sufficiently clear, they work really well typically.
I saw some really interesting antennas in Japan, because so many people live in big apartment buildings, and there's a lot more apartment dweller antennas there than I've seen here. And one of the most common ones is some kind of a bracket that you affix to your balcony, and then it's essentially a dipole. Imagine like a buddy pole, but in like a V configuration, but it's horizontal. So it looks like like big cat whiskers sticking off the side horizontally, coming off your balcony. So I don't really have something like that, but although I could probably do like some fiberglass poles or something, but that might raise an eyebrow.
I was thinking you could use a like a quarter wave vertical, but rotate it 90 degrees so that it's a quarter wave horizontal.
Yeah,
you can just do it inverted as well. Just running in like an upside down inverted L. You run the one leg around the baseboards of your apartment, and you stick the fiberglass pole off the end of the balcony, and then the wire just drops straight down. It's got a little fishing sinker on the end, so it's like an upside down inverted L, or that if you're really high in the air, those things can work really well.
Yeah, I also think
counterpoise.
If I
make
were
friends with your downstairs neighbor by like dropping a flag along with them.
The other thing that I always like to tell people, regardless of what antenna you're using, if you're operating from an apartment and whatever, you have to be very careful about running single sideband. You want to run digital or CW, because if your neighbor hears FT8 coming out of their clock radio, they're not going to know it's you. But if they hear your voice coming out of their clock radio, it's game over.
Yeah, exactly.
No, Kirk, it's funny you mentioned that. In the early days of Actor, my neighbor, you're coming over my stereo, and I hate to say this in public, but really, oh, well, let me come over and have a look. And I went over and looked, and here's this, yeah, that's really bad. Nah, not me, I'm here. Left him
And what was the address of this place you lived at, Ben?
Might have been the Beaches.
Yeah.
If you're gonna run it, if you're gonna run SSB, you need Vince's voice changer.
That's right.
Oh yeah, that's a great idea.
Yeah, this will work really well.
Perfect.
You want to go with the Barry White one. It's going to modulate typical sideband passband better, perhaps, than that little Mickey Mouse voice.
Oh yes, it will modulate so much better.
There you go.
No, you got to find that sweet spot where you sound like a YL, so you can break the pileups.
Oh, good idea. Yeah.
See what happens, George, when you send me a mixer?
Yeah. I never played with that part of the software. So, by the way, do you like the mixer except for the RFI?
Except for the RFI, yeah, it's tremendous. My brother and I spent probably half an hour on a 2-minute question last night because he's like, "Well, show me this, show me this, show me this."
Yeah, the software is really amazing. So
yeah, the software is amazing. The mixer is amazing. He was a front of house guy front of house sound engineer for 30 years,
wow.
and so he knows all about audio. Anyway, hey Troy, did you come with more questions, man?
I did. Well, I've already mentioned a few of them, but first, Mike, I do have a 500-foot spool of 14 gauge house wire, and my wife's going to be out of town in a few weeks, so I might have to put up a horizontal loop.
He says very quietly.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, it's going to be coming into winter, right? So she's not going to be gardening, so you were good to go for at least.
Yeah, I think if I get it high enough, she wouldn't notice it anyway.
And feel free to put the feed point anywhere you want.
Oh yeah.
Doesn't matter. You don't have to put it on an edge, a corner, a side. Just put it wherever it works out the best.
Cool.
They are an antenna that you benefit from having if you've got any friends that could come over to help you put it up. Having 3 points that you're pulling up in 3 different trees or more, you're always mitigating all these things you never realized were in the way, like the corner of your house. I got I got this antenna when I first put it up, almost snagged on our solar panels on our house. I mean, just weird stuff that you would never think. So if you've got a friend that owes you a favor, have them come out and help you get that 14 gauge stuff up.
If not, make sure you wear your Fitbit because you're going to be tracking on the. Speaking
That's
from
right.
experience.
I like Bill's answer. Tell her it's either the wire or an 80-foot tower. She gets to choose.
By the way,
the other thing. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
I was going to change subjects on you. I was going to say here, Earl said which mixer. It's a Behringer XR12. For those interested, it's basically a headless mixer. You put the mixer under the shelf somewhere. There's no faders. It's all done through software.
It's amazing.
Okay. So will it make you a YL during a contest?
Apparently.
I don't know. I could try it now, and you guys could see it, but we're getting way off the track of ham radio to do that.
All right.
Back to Troy.
So I wanted to go back to my antenna test, and George, you said that your club had done something similar in the past. I'd love to hear.
Yeah, the point was to do at least an A/B test, and eventually we wanted to do a 4-antenna test. And so one of the guys in our club came up with this idea to use JT65. This is before FT8 was really the thing. So and I would probably use FT8, or actually I'd use Whisper now. So I think he was using a JT65, and he wrote a piece of software on his PC that would send a serial command to my little 4-port HF antenna relay board. So we did a Workbench build project some years ago that was a 1-to-4 antenna relay. And so he wrote the code so that it would transmit JT65, and then on the right time boundary would switch the antenna and send JT65, and then it would register it somewhere, kind of like Whisper. So if I were doing it again now, I'd do something like set up my Whisper transmitter, which is easier, and just let it fly, and then switch the antenna every couple of minutes, and then look at the timing. And you could even do something like switch call signs. That way, for sure which call sign matches which antenna. Just get you and your buddies, right? Everybody contributes a call sign to the project, and then you can see on the Whisper reporter thing where you're being heard. That'd be probably the easiest way these days.
How far apart my thought was I was going to kind of have them all rigged and then laid down on the ground and then put one up at a time, because I didn't want to have.
No, we just set them up. We just went to the park, set them all up, ran the coax back to a central point where the switch was into the radio, and then just ran it that way.
How far apart did you have?
Well, we're on 20 meters, and they were probably 20 feet apart, roughly. I mean, it wasn't very scientific. I mean, the downside to this, if you really want to get scientific about it, is, well, I'm transmitting at this point in time on this antenna, and at a different point in time on a different antenna. So it's really not transmitting simultaneously, but close enough, right? It's like propagation is not going to be that different from minute to minute. So we
Yeah,
didn't really worry about that.
Whisper's
That was
pretty
good enough.
slow. And
The other thing that we noticed too, by the way, was just manually switching between the antennas. We had we had a couple of verticals. We had, I think, an inverted V, and we had a delta loop. It was a vertical delta loop, and this guy had a really clever idea. I thought this is brilliant, and he actually got it from somebody else. He built this little pipe stand thing with two pieces of PVC, and then put a fiberglass fishing pole up out of the two PVC tubes, and the poles were about 20 feet long, and so you can do a vertical triangle with the feed point at the bottom. And that essentially is a horizontally polarized antenna, even though it looks vertical if you feed it at the bottom. And it crushed all the other antennas. And so it was really amazing. And the big difference was the vertical antennas were much noisier. Now we're in a park in the city, so it's like, a couple hundred feet away is suburbia. So there's a lot of noise sources. But the vertical loop was amazing. I mean, it was an eye opener. So
Don't
yeah, it's great exercise.
don't discount the social elements of this. And George is being very scientific with switching automatically between them and whatever. No, 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 no. Hams have opinions, and they won't change their opinions until they actually embarrass themselves in front of other hams. So
Yeah.
what you want to do is divide up into like teams of 2, or if you're really brave, do it by yourself. Have each group set up an antenna and then have one master switch between like one of these 5-position switches or something, and let people actually make the contacts right there. And yes, it's not the most scientific method, but boy, it is hilarious to watch because
Yeah. Rod, we actually called our event the antenna shootout because it really was a form of a competition, and it was like everybody just brought their favorite antenna. And it was funny how this guy Mike, OID, his loop just crushed everybody. The rest of us were like, oh yeah, Mike won. It was like you didn't have to measure anything. You could just sit there and listen, and it's like S units of noise difference between the antennas. It was quite amazing.
Thomas, I know you tested the chameleon delta loop. Would that kind of be the same thing?
So it's I don't really know the dynamics of delta loops that are kind of that small, that are multi-band. But I can say that when I've used that delta loop in noisy environments, it has been much quieter than a vertical. But I will hit parks on occasion. Like there's one park that they've got something inside the visitor center that just spews RFI, and the delta loop, that chameleon delta loop will work. But it's basically two 17-foot stainless steel telescoping poles in sort of a V shape with a just a line connecting the tops of those. Together. But actually, I've built, haven't taken it to the field yet, a 40-meter vertical delta loop, and George, like we had a very similar experience at a field day once with a 40-meter and a 20-meter delta loop that just smashed everything else. Like they were just incredible antennas, and but you can't really. I know they're multi-band, I think, on harmonics, and someone else here probably knows more about that, but I pretty much stayed on the band that I cut it for, instead of moving around very much. And certainly didn't use an ATU at all.
And a question from the audience, is that the tactical delta loop?
That's correct. It's the tactical delta loop antenna. Basically, kind of one thing you can do is get the tactical delta loop antenna. I don't know the pricing now, but if you buy that setup, you basically also have their impasse light, which is just a 17-foot vertical antenna that you can make too. And I find that a really practical one for soda summits and stuff. If you're not in an area with just complete rock, summits, if you can plunge the spike into the ground, that makes for a really easy to put up multi-band vertical antenna.
So, on the price front, I think those chameleons are around $400 for something.
Yeah, that's probably right.
The delta loop that Mike built, if you include all of the PVC from Home Depot and all the wire and the 4-to-1 feed point, I think he had less than $100 into his homebrew antenna.
The
And it would
vertical
essentially be the same
loops,
thing.
the vertical loops, they share a lot of the same really good qualities that the horizontal loops do. Um, they still have the higher order resonances. The biggest difference is they have a bidirectional pattern, primarily like a dipole, and they don't have that, super wide azimuth range of the horizontal loop. But they, under certain conditions, they are fantastic. They're just not quite as versatile.
I think that makes for a great field day antenna because it's very lightweight. You can easily break it down and take it with you. It doesn't cost much. Might be a good club build project for that matter.
So
You could
a vertical loop, I assume that a radiation pattern is edge on, or is it broadside?
broadside.
Broadside.
Oh, it is broadside. Okay.
Yeah, and actually, you're talking about
Okay.
field day antennas. The cool thing is you can have multiple vertical delta loop antennas, and when you get up to those higher frequencies, they're not that big, and they're
Right.
amazing.
Yeah, I was trying to make one for 40. I thought it would be an ultimately great antenna field day in 40, but the geometry just gets kind
It
of
gets big.
crazy big. Yeah, 20 is
They're
sweet
fine
spot.
if you can hang them from a tree branch or something. The other thing about the horizontal loop too, if you don't have a sufficient number of skyhooks placed in the right spot, even a sloping horizontal loop from one part of the triangle where you have the feed point is high and the other ones, you just have 15-foot poles. That thing will still work like gangbusters. Now it's not quite, doesn't have exactly the same radiation pattern as the horizontal loop, but a lot of guys can't even really tell the difference. And I remember reading about a guy who loop came down during a hurricane, and he was all lamenting that he had one tower up and the antenna blew off the top of the tower, but he put a sloping horizontal loop off the tower with a couple of 10 or 15-foot poles for the bottom legs, and he said it worked just like the other one, so he never bothered fixing it, quote unquote fixing it. And so the very forgiving. Vertical loops are very forgiving as well in every way except that bidirectional azimuth pattern.
So by the
you
way,
guys,
go ahead. Finish your thought.
you guys on the West Coast, a lot of California field day, back in the day used to use a big vertical loops, because you pretty much only need to steer them in one direction and you get the whole
Right.
country pretty much. And so, yeah.
Especially in the southern part of California where I'm at.
Yeah.
Like I put my antenna up on a rotator on the top of my house,
Right.
and I never use the rotator.
Right.
Sure,
Exactly.
it still works.
Every once in a
Well,
no, I'm not sure.
There's probably like a whole half a dB difference between the different directions. Just a quick note here. Bill AC7SR asked for there's plans for the pole V antenna. If you mean the loop, yeah. If you go to our club website, which is baynet.org, bay-net.org, and then you click on the resources tab, and then go down to Baycon 2018, and you'll find a presentation there, 20-meter portable Delta Loop by Mike KI6OID. So he's got pictures and a bill of materials and everything you need to make that.
What's the domain name, George? BAYNET?
bay-net.org. Bay-net.
You can buy the other one, though, that's not without the dash.
Yeah, they've been trying to sell it to us for years. We're not buying.
All right, so appreciate the advice on that. And then the last thing I had on my list was our SET planning for October 1st. And again, we're trying to test a lot of the technologies that we would think that we would use in a real emergency, but we want to make it simple enough to have a good effective test within a couple of hours and include enough people in it. So what are and John, I know you have published some articles on this on your site. I'd be interested in your perspective or anybody's perspective on how to think about planning for SCT.
I would say the best exercise I was in where the person came over net control and said, "Attention all operators, your antenna now just broke. Please replace that antenna and come back on the air in 5 minutes." And that almost ended the exercise.
Wow.
Something as simple as that, saying your
Holy moly.
hand mic just broke. Come back on the air in 5 minutes and let's do another roll call and see who's still here. And it was kind of like a game of elimination to see the last man standing or woman.
What a
based
tremendous
on a
approach.
scenario of failures, you know.
Interesting. We were planning on starting on our repeater and then saying the repeater went down, please, QSY to the channels indicated on your ICS 205 form. And
Yeah,
see
you may lose a lot of people if you say the repeater's going down, please stay on this channel but go to simplex. And people don't know how to turn their radio out of programming to simplex. So yeah, just a lot of things, and give points or something. Make it a poker game.
Can I touch on that for a second? You guys have more experience at this than I do, but I have a kind of a personal gripe, and that is that radios are so easy to hand program. And so often I hear people say, "Oh, well, I got to get the programming software." And programming software is great, and I buy it too, but it shouldn't be your crutch. You should be able to program the frequency, the offset, and the PL in your radio. I mean, you could be absolved of knowing anything else about your radio, but for goodness sake, you should be able to know how to do that stuff. So
that's
I think
true for the Japanese radios that are sold and designed for the ham market. That is not true for commercial radios.
Well, okay, obviously, yes, of course. It's not true for any radio that doesn't have a keypad that you can't program. But I'm talking about normal ham radios, and so I think I would restrict this to using normal ham radios.
But I don't think it's fair to assume that everybody who's participating in one of these exercises has a ham radio and not.
Well, I do think that's a important aspect of the drill. To come to find out that commercial radios are great for some things, but they really aren't for other things. And if you're going to have a commercial radio, you better have a Japanese handy-talkie also as a backup, so you can do this. So I love this idea of how the rules change, John.
Yeah.
So maybe another rule change would be, we're going to announce what simplex frequency you have to go to during the exercise, and now you have to prove that you know how to change the frequency and the offset and the PL. Because really, I mean, I think that's one of the most fundamentally important things to know, because if the poop hits the fan and you go somewhere, you may not have all the right stuff programmed in your radio to begin with. In fact, you probably don't.
Hear that all the time.
Yeah.
So I would add to that one little friendly modification to that. I agree with what George is saying, but I think there's a wonderful opportunity. First off, if you eliminate everybody out of the call, oh yeah, you can't get a new mic or whatever, you just failed your exercise. Right? Like now you've got two people standing at the end of it, and that's all very nice from a ha-ha perspective, but you failed the exercise, like as a group. So here's an idea.
Failure's always an option.
Take George's concept, and give them pre-work and say, here's the type of things we might be called upon to do. And give them a fighting chance, particularly if it's a fairly young or new group. And say, get that pre-work out there. Hey, you might want to try this. You might want to try that.
Yep.
And that way, because nobody likes to be on the spot. And I know that's technically testing it, but we've had a group around Ontario that just gets like crazy in their level of final exam things going on, which takes the fun. It sucks the oxygen right out of the room.
Mm-hmm.
So I think giving them a fighting chance, being as inclusive as you can, and near the end of the exercise, if you want to get into the crazy hard questions, right on. Let's see who the last man standing is. That's fabulous. But make sure the majority of it.
That shouldn't be out of the chute. That shouldn't be the first test.
Yeah.
Oh, come on, guys.
If you have a lot of old timers, towards the end of the test, you can just say, oops, we've had an EMP air burst. Log back in 5 minutes with a tube-based regen. Mark.
No transistors allowed.
You're a dick.
So I'll add a question to this. I'm going to add a question to John's. I'm going to be so bold as to do that. And on Sunday, I'm giving a presentation to another conference, Radio Amateurs of Canada. And this is one of the points I'm making about MCOM and public service events. Always bring your manual. So to John's question and answer approach. Dear participants, please open your radio's manual to page 36 and read the first complete sentence your eye sees. And I wonder how many of them can locate their manual. I wonder how many of them brought their manual. Yep. And it drives me absolutely bonkers when I'm running net control and doing technology support for rally sport events, like where I had to put up the dumpster repeater, which is a whole story under its own, and we don't have that much lawn left to mow, so I won't. And a guy drives up and he's got a Motorola radio. Well, okay, so now I carry mini UHF connectors as a direct result of my RF kit in case I need to patch him into a normal antenna. But people will call me up in net control, or they'll call me on my phone and go, well, I've got this blah, blah, blah radio. Do you know how to crossband it? Do you know how to set a tone on it? Well, goodness no. You did bring your manual, right? Because 3 emails organizing you said to bring your manual. Anyway,
no,
I'll get off my soapbox now, but thank you for coming to my TED Talk.
But and I agree. I mean, I can navigate good English. I can navigate pretty much any
yes,
amateur radio today.
Yes, you can.
Because the etchings are always on the radio. If you take a chance and look at the color code, they actually spend a lot of time on the keypad to give you enough clues where to figure out how to do something.
Yep.
And all of them do if it's got a keypad. So I may have forgotten my manual, but if you tell me you want to go here with a reverse DCS code of 077, I can do that.
See, but I guess my point is I'm not trying to skunk the person with the obscure feature. I think it's the most fundamental thing, which is going to be, like set the frequency to a different one and the offset and the PL tone. I mean, if you can't do that, then you really have no reason to be trying to do emergency communications. I mean, because that's pretty basic.
Hello.
Like Kenwood 732, you do anything in 10 seconds on that.
Yep, you and me both. Mine, I still have mine, and I've replaced the display on it once already.
And this is a learning exercise, and people learn really, really well when they're having fun.
Yes.
Mm-hmm. So, I mean, that's my part.
No fun for you.
So maybe one way to do this is if there's multiple things that are going to be tested. Maybe it's not like, you go through the things and you're eliminated, then you're like out of the game. But it could be like, okay, there's 10 things we're going to do. And you kind of score yourself and you say, okay, out of the 10 things that I needed to accomplish, how many was I able to do? You don't even have to tell anybody how many you flubbed on. But at least like, oh, I have no idea how to program my radio. That's the one I need to go do.
It's a wonderful learning approach.
And
I'm
then
curious
the next part.
On these emergency tests and whatnot, is there ever any like an HF or portable HF component? Because I have a handy talkie. I've used it 3 times in 45 years. The kind of emergency comms I tend to think
wheels
of
still working.
Get batteries for that 202.
No, they work. I think of more like
because he hardly uses it.
Thomas grade emergency, like, can you whip up a signal on 40 meters on HF, for wider coverage? And I just realized I don't know if HF or portable HF factors into any of these kind of modern SET type scenarios.
We are going to test portable HF. Not everybody has portable HF, but some people do, and I think we're going to have enough to spread it around and be able to test some of that. And obviously, voice sideband test. We're going to try to maybe use VAR AC or VARAC or however you want to say it for chat and file transfer, and then also WinLink, and try to do some WinLink peer-to-peer.
See, we do.
I've noticed. I was watching some. One thing you might want to check out, Troy. Have you seen the Rat Pack YouTube video channel?
I have.
There's some outstanding public service resources and
Outstanding.
people there. And one thing I noticed looking at the presentations is WinLink, as you just mentioned. WinLink has apparently become kind of the thing that's
Yeah.
super popular. And I think part of the reason is that served agencies get the idea of email. And WinLink essentially gives you email. And much to my surprise, when I started playing with WinLink, even with my little 705 and a vertical antenna, it works. So it's pretty incredible. So I think of all the digital modes, that would be something I would certainly consider.
And don't forget WinLink over VHF.
Oh yeah,
good point.
No,
Good point.
that's VHF is going to be our primary test, and WinLink also has all the forms built in.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
So
yes, it does.
I'm just going to hold out for WinLink over quantum entanglement and just cut through the interference all the way.
See,
I have an antenna for that.
There is a different form of this emergency exercise that you may want to try out next time. And Mike Walker knows this really well. We do it at Dayton every year with our club, which is all HF operators.
I was just going to bring this up.
We bring our HTs, and the night before the flea market opens, everybody sits around and tests their HTs because we're going to use it to find stuff, right? Like we spread out like a net over the Dayton flea market and we communicate over the HTs, except these.
Oh, right as Rod's telling the story.
These club members will take the part I was going to say was it will take them the entire drive to Dayton from Toronto, which is
HTs.
That's what I was about saying, Rod. It can take them the entire drive from Toronto to Dayton, which is including stops 10 hours, right, to pull it off.
Yeah, it's great. And then inevitably, some members who shall remain nameless simply hand it to Mike or me or somebody else
at breakfast.
Oh, okay. So
you're the gateway station.
So that tells me what I have to be prepared for next spring. Got it.
Yep.
Got it.
So yeah, we are VHF is going to be our primary, and we're going to try to not use the repeater and run everything over simplex. And one of the things we want to do is have people at different locations. If A can't talk to C, then try to figure out if A can talk to B and B can talk to C, and try to self-map, who can talk to who, and establish kind of a network so that we can eventually get to everybody. So
I see now that cell phones can connect through Starlink now, and I just wonder how that factors into it and what hams might do with that in an emergency.
That's a great plug. Thank you very much. That's my video coming out Sunday.
Oh,
there you go. Is Starlink the death knell of emergency communications, or is it just another tool in the toolbox? We'll just tease it there.
Yeah.
I like it.
John, I think we need to rely on one single piece of infrastructure for all critical communications. I think that's a great idea.
Yes. Single point of failure is good. Yep.
Yeah, exactly.
But if you're an emergency operator, and emergencies are regional, right? Like if we have an emergency where a person in the theater is having to talk 40 meters to another person in the theater, that is a pretty bad emergency. That's a nationwide emergency, right?
Mm-hmm.
So emergencies are typically very regionally located. Think Puerto Rico, just the island. Think hurricanes going through Texas. It was very isolated for cell outage, and data outage was a very small affected area, or a tornado area. So if I'm an operator and I walk into an EOC with a 40 meter and a requirement to talk to the outside world, I walk into that EOC with a 40 meter and a requirement I need this much square footage for my radio that may or may not work depending on band conditions. Or if I walk in with my Starlink and say, I can set it on the ground here and you can have a video conference with FEMA headquarters in a half hour or 10 minutes. What's going to be more valuable for these emergencies?
I have often said our skill as radio amateurs is that we understand the best mode and method to get a message across given the circumstances put in front of us.
Hey, good point. And John, I want to comment on your comment, if I may. Two things. One is the utility of HF for regional communications is legit in mountainous areas.
Oh yeah, I mean in Nimbus, that's where we're at.
Yeah, exactly. So there, I think there, that's really the role. And the other thing is, I think one of the points that you make in your videos, you talk about having like 3 levels. I forget what you call it, but there's like, here's the normal way I do this. Here's the backup way, and here's the oh my god backup way. What do you call that?
The primary, secondary, and emergency.
There you go. So in that context, something like Starlink could be the primary if you're trying to get out of region, and HF could be the secondary or the tertiary. But the point is that I like your the way you have that structured, where there's like the easy, obvious thing that as long as it works is great. But when it doesn't work, then you got plan B, and when that doesn't work, you got plan C. That makes a lot of sense to me.
Yeah. And so that's kind of what I've been moodling this for a while, because iPhone's going to start, possibly working with Starlink. Sprint announced that you could get limited text messaging out. We have a Bear 100 where we do WinLink over VHF, and it's always a constant battle to get digipeaters up on mountaintops. And I thought, man, if I just show up to my station at the Bear 100, which is a 100-mile ultra run in backcountry, if I just show up with my Starlink, I could be sending emails out a lot faster via that than WinLink. But what like what Vince talked about, it's the tool, and we can't be married to a single tool if we're going to be in the realm of this emergency communications. We have to know what our capabilities are and the limitations, because, like you said, Starlink has just as many limitations as any other mode that we have.
Just like Clint Eastwood said, a ham's got to know his limitations.
All right.
I have one more question, George.
Fire away.
And it's maybe for Thomas and you. I have all my portable equipment, and I'm looking for advice on a bag to put it all in.
You saved this
and Rod for that.
Boy, that's a softball for all softballs.
You saved this for 3 hours into this.
There you go. There you go.
Okay, we're good for another 3 hours at this point.
I'm done.
Let's talk about stitching.
It's 12:06 here, so.
Have we covered screwdrivers yet?
Yes, with the bottle cap opener.
I tried.
That's awesome.
Okay, Thomas, the ball's been tossed to your way.
So what is the equipment that you're putting in a bag?
First of all, it was a joke, but
Yeah,
no, you're in this now. We're committed.
Wait. Are we talking spring or summer? I mean, let's
right. Yeah. And what's the color of your vehicle? Because that's important too when it's sitting next to it.
Exactly.
Fun and fast.
I've got a KX3 that I carry with a 3 amp hour Bio-NO. And a little bag with some throw line in it, and a Pac-10 9-to-1 with some RG36, like maybe 25 feet of RG316.
Very nice. Yeah.
And I have a little, do you know Really Useful Box? Are you familiar with that brand? Mm-hmm. There's a brand of plastic boxes called Really Useful Box, and they are really cool. But anyway, I've got one of those in there with a lot of little adapters, and I've got my little. Who's the guy that makes the little silver aluminum keys?
N0 SA.
Yes, I've got one of those in there as well.
Yeah.
So that's it.
Yeah. Excellent. Okay. Yeah. So, I mean, I gotta say, I can fit my KX3 and George has one of these, the Red Ox Micromanager bag, which I really like, and you'd be able to fit all that stuff, I'm pretty sure. And I mean, I could actually test it for you later because I've got all those things you're talking about. But they fit in there really nicely, and I've even used that bag inside another pack, like if I'm going to hike in, and I've got that one all packed out. I've got some over here, but it'd be a pain to grab right now. But I can even throw it in another bag in a pinch. Like if I'm going to hike in somewhere and do a soda activation, and I don't want to literally take everything out of the micromanager to put into a backpack, I can do that. But I've actually found, to me, the main thing is to have a system in place where where everything is in there and everything has a place. It's not just a bag of stuff, that you've got some organization inside of it so that you can, put it together. If it's nighttime and your headlamp goes out, you can still grab all the parts and stick them in your pack and know where they go. And so you can feel around and make sure you've got all your gear with you. And I think that's an important part of MCOM too, is knowing what you have, where it is, and knowing how to manage it in not ideal lighting and, in adverse weather conditions and all kinds of things. So, but the key is you never have enough bags, right? So,
Oh, you never do.
There are 12 months of the year.
That's right.
Conversely, I was going to suggest that you could just use a rolled up McDonald's sandwich bag to handle the stuff that you just mentioned.
The Happy Meal box is not rolled up.
We can put that into a plastic Aldi's bag for waterproofing.
And that's
You're good to go. You're good to go.
Probably less attractive from a theft standpoint.
Perhaps.
That's right.
Perhaps. We're talking cost here.
Yeah.
Dear listeners, this is a demonstration opposite ends of the spectrum. So we're clear on this.
So
I did not endorse that message.
One of the themes that you're mentioning, Thomas, we sort of echoed this in the tool discussion and with some of the comments in the chat, and that is the idea of don't put stuff in a bag, go use it, bring it home, and then disassemble the bag and spread things around. Leave everything in one place. I think that's really
very important.
That's more important than the color of the maybe almost as important as the color of the bag and the sticker on it. So I think that's really key. And by the way, once you get your portable set up, if you have a second one, it gives you an excuse to buy a second key or a second battery or a second whatever, because you don't want to split the sets apart.
Oh no, the pieces get lonely if they're not near each other.
That's right.
That's right.
One other quick brand specific thing is it. So for me, sometimes what I'll do is I leave everything in a bag, like you're describing, Thomas. But if I'm going somewhere, I could just take the bag. But if I'm gonna go on a day hike or something, putting that bag in the backpack's a little cumbersome. So I've got, for the radio, a low pro camera case, and actually Elecraft was selling the low pro cases for the KX2 because it fit perfectly in there. But you need a bigger one, and they make bigger ones. And so my 705 fits in a low pro, this almost like ruggedy kind of nylon, almost. It's not a hard shell case, but it's not just like soft cloth. It's kind of.
Is it one of the drone
inside?
Is it one of the drone cases?
I think so.
Drone cases or Game Boy cases.
It's a small, right. I think it's a small drone case. And what I do is I put the radio and just a few of the accessories in that. And then I have another little backpacking nylon zipper lightweight bag, and I put the cables and antenna and stuff in that. And that way I don't have a big thing I'm trying to shove into the backpack. I got two smaller things that I could pop in there along with, my jacket or whatever.
Yep.
But then when it comes home, they come out of the backpack and back into their normal, satchel.
Yeah. And I think that's like it's having like a kind of a workflow when you take your gear out. If you change it so if you have a dedicated field pack for like a full radio kit, and you alter something in it, like you take it out to put it in a different bag for a different application, somewhere, when you come back, you put it back where it was. And I think that's sort of the same, I've always said, like, one of my golden rules myself for packing up things is I don't take from one pack to feed another, because when you do that, that's when you get to the field and you find you're missing stuff that's crucial. So you have to just be like methodical about checking and making sure everything's in there and returning it. And
it's a guaranteed way to have two keys and no microphone or something.
That's exactly right. That's exactly right. Yep. Mm-hmm.
So do you have a checklist per kit, Thomas?
I do have a checklist. I've been meaning to make like laminated checklists to keep with each one of them. Right now, I have the checklist that's mainly to keep modular packs together because I test a lot of radios and try a lot of radios, and I don't have dedicated field kits for each one of them. So I just have like the generic thing. I've got the transceiver, I've got the key, I've got the mic or whatever, I've got the battery, and make sure I've got those things in place when I throw it in a bag. I actually have that kind of down to. I always liken it to like I've got a friend that's a commercial airline pilot, and they have all these checklists that they're the ones that are in their head, committed to memory, to that chemical memory in the brain, so it's always there no matter what over a long period of time. And then they've got the ones that they can reference on paper when something happens. And I really do try to commit the basic packing to memory, so I can but I like doing that. So
I need a checklist to remind me to read the checklist.
Yes.
We can arrange for one of those for you.
I'll throw out another tip, by the way, that I thought is along these lines. So, Stuart, KB1HQS, who was Mr. Napoda #1 in the Napoda thing, and he wrote the portable operating book that the ARRL published. And he has some really wonderful videos. And one of my favorite sets of videos is how he organizes his stuff. And, so for those of us who are neurotic packers, it's very cathartic to watch how you organize your gear. Anyway, one of his tips that I thought was very good is that if he takes anything out of one of his bags, he puts a flag on the bag. And what he uses these, the paint stirring sticks. And then he gets one of those, remove before it fly tags. You can get like 20 of them for $10. And so he makes a flag out of that. And so if he takes anything out of one of his gear bags, he sticks one of those in it. So he knows if he goes to grab the bag, something's up because, he pulled something out of it.
And a stir stick is a great big visual reminder too, right?
Yeah, exactly. You can't miss it.
Hockey stick.
Yeah.
Hockey stick.
So when you're
How big is this bag?
That's for the pallets on the air.
I knew we'd come back to pallets on the air, but
that's great. Thank you, Wade,
Is that
so
before
much.
or after Walmart's on the air?
Yeah, something
Walmart
like that,
parking
but
lots?
only if they're blue pallets then, because that's the check ones that Walmart uses. Troy, bravo for baiting both these guys on bags. And I know that
That's awesome.
But that was
Hour
the
4.
ultimate
It really was a joke, and I didn't mean to get them going, but they just couldn't help themselves.
You say that bravo on getting them going like that's a challenge.
Or a good thing.
Or a good thing, yeah.
No, it's all fun.
Well,
He'll never joke about that again.
I can't wait for the upcoming episode with Thomas when we talk about limited space workbenches, when one of us is just going to be a Sierra Delta and throw the question out about a bag.
Just because there's a small number of items doesn't mean you can't talk about it forever. So
I am.
That's right.
Yeah, I am anxious to know how Thomas, how you're going to select what equipment you put on your Murphy bench. So that's
me too.
It's going to be an exciting episode.
You think about these things in your head and you're like, oh yeah, I've got this. And then you start looking at your stuff and you're like, whoa, I forgot about this really important piece here.
So, so then maybe 2 months from now is a little bit too soon for us to be recording that episode, and you and I should reschedule it. We can do that.
There's nothing better than a deadline.
A tiny French cleat wall inside the Murphy bench. That way you can rearrange
there you go.
whatever after the fact, and you don't have to rebuild the whole thing.
Absolutely brilliant.
That's right.
we should invite you to the show so we can get the right design figured out.
Happy to help.
That'd be awesome. Well, I think we're tipping over 3 hours here, so I think we're gonna wrap things up. And so we can go on for hours, but it's getting pretty late. And we have. So first off, I really want to thank Eric ForZ1UG for putting on the QSO Today Virtual Ham Expo.
Getting better every time.
Fifth one? And the infrastructure is constantly getting better. He's really done an amazing job of pulling it together. Great speakers. Love the lounge. Hope to spend some time in the lounge this weekend. And thank you very much, Eric, for not only doing that, but giving us a place to go hang out. So much obliged. Secondly, I want to thank all the folks who dialed in tonight and were watching the live stream and asked a bunch of great questions. We didn't get to everything, but we got to as much of that stuff as we could. So thank you so much for sharing your questions and comments. And I want to say a big thank you to our special guests tonight. So I put out the call kind of at the last minute and said, hey, we want friends and family to show up for the live stream. If you guys can make it, would love to have you on. So Thomas, K4SWL, thank you so much for joining us tonight.
You're very welcome. Thank you for inviting me.
Absolutely. John W7DBO.
You're welcome. Are we still live?
I
Yes.
know so.
Yeah. Okay.
And Kirk,
Oh, yeah, it's still running. I checked.
NT0Z.
Okay.
Well,
Thank you
since
for
we're
making it.
still live, I'll just say thank you. It's been fun.
That's awesome. And Troy, thanks for coming back and being our question master and hanging out.
You bet. Thanks for having me. It's been a real pleasure.
Thank you. So we'll have to do it again. We'll have to get you guys back on. And to all of my normal, wonderful crew of people, wasn't sure I was going to make it tonight. By the way, I got a special thank you here to Vince. Vince is the guy who, when we get into deep trouble and things are going sideways, Vince is like, Mr. Cool as a Cucumber, I got this. And I want to thank you so much for making this happen tonight, Vince. You were
My
amazing.
absolute pleasure.
I can vouch for Vince. He was active troubleshooting a full hour before airtime because I saw him there.
Yeah,
I logged in
we did
way early, and I'm in the other room, and all of a sudden I can hear voices on the speakers. It was like, it's only 8 o'clock.
And obviously, thanks very much, Mark, Rod, Mike. Thanks for joining tonight. And so, with that, to everybody who's listening to the watching the live stream and listening to the podcast, would like to say from all of us at the Ham Radio Workbench 73.
73.
Take care.
7-3.
Be good humans. See y'all tomorrow. And